Chapter 1950. The giant spirit was destroyed along with the evil soul, and under its influence, Lei Ju also showed signs of abnormality. At this time, the evil aura surging around Lei Ju's body quickly thinned out, and his realm regressed. In the blink of an eye, he fell from the flawless Thuarch realm back to the true self realm. As the disappeared thunder power rejuvenated, his temperament also changed faintly, as if he had returned to a normal person. The void was exceptionally quiet, and the sounds of fighting stopped everywhere. Pairs of eyes looked up at the sky above. As the evil aura suddenly dissipated, many people were puzzled. Did Dinda win? At this time, Qin Hao's figure descended from the ninth heaven. His appearance did not change from before, and even his aura was not that oppressive, which made the Thearchs even more puzzled. Only Zhan Wu looked up at the setting sun battle god, who had lost one of his souls and couldn't help but shed a tear. He had protected Qin Hao for 4 lifetimes and had been forced to wander about. Finally, his long-cherished wish had come true. He knew that Qin Hao had returned to the divine throne. This was because he could sense the power of Dinda's heavenly wheel through the honest battle scripture. Buzz, a layer of divine light descended. Before Zhan Wu could react, it swallowed the first palace master's thunder incantation. The surging light separated him from the sunset battle god. At this time, Qin Hao stood in the divine light, looking at Lei Ju with a calm expression. He slowly said, "Ru Shuang, Uncle Xiao, they're all outside. Now, is there any need to continue fighting between you and me?" Lei Ju's body trembled violently. He lowered his head and took a deep breath. He admitted, "Indeed, you have reached the apotheosis realm and control the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness. Now, I'm no longer qualified to compete with you." But Lei Ju raised his head and asked in the tone of an old friend, "How did you see the flaw and recognize me?" His disguise was flawless. "Is that important?" Qin Hao asked. Whether it was the black-robed Emperor Yuan's obstruction when he entered the divine palace, or the giant spirit breaking free and killing everyone just now, he immediately stopped attacking the northern frontier Thearchs just because of Face Like Cream's painful cry. All of this allowed Qin Hao to capture the human nature hidden deep within the Thunder Mantra. However, the main reason he could recognize it was because of the change in his realm. After stepping into the divine realm, Israel had become one with the heavenly Tao. Every person and every living thing in the divine wilderness could be sensed by Qin Hao. This had nothing to do with the 10,000 spirit fire pupils. It was an extreme feeling. "Haha, what are you going to do?" Lei Ju asked calmly. "I can't possibly keep you." Qin Hao answered directly, "But I will convey the God's will to the world and commend all the forces that participated in this battle. Also, I will tell the world that Array Monarch Yin of the northern borderline died while searching for the array of the divine slaying." "Ha ha!" Lei Ju shook his head and laughed. He could understand that Qin Hao couldn't tolerate him. He had to give an explanation to the people who died in this battle. But the latter part of the sentence, "Array Emperor Yin died for the evil slayer," it was equivalent to saying that the evil soul killed the evil soul, which was quite interesting. Lei Ju understood that Qin Hao made up this white lie to deceive the world for the sake of Face Like Cream's reputation. Phew. Lei Ju let out a long sigh and said, "All right, you win. Xiao, you really found a good son-in-law. Even I can't help but envy you. If I knew this would happen, I would have sent Ru Shuang to Qiuqian Town in western Liang before you regained consciousness. If he had trained Qin Hao to be his son-in-law, he wouldn't have had to fight with him today." Qin Hao was speechless. "There's one more question. What is the apotheosis realm like?" "Don't worry, I won't cheat you. After this wish is fulfilled, I will disappear on my own." Lei Ju promised in the name of Array Emperor Yin. "What is it like?" Qin Hao seemed to be deep in thought, but he couldn't answer. He stretched out his hand, and a frail little blade of grass grew in the center of his palm. As divine light flashed in Qin Hao's eyes, the little blade of grass in the center of his palm suddenly bloomed, and a flower bud bloomed. This is the scenery of the divine path. Lei Ju frowned. His first thought was that Dindu would kill the grass in his hand. That was probably why he wasn't accepted by the heavenly path of the divine Baron. I hope you can always treat this godless land well. I have one last request. Lei Ju took a few steps forward and wanted to reach out his hand to pat Dandy's shoulder. However, he realized that it was inappropriate and tactfully said, "Please, take care of my daughter. She is innocent, please." "Who dares to offend the daughter of Emperor Shao?" Qin Hao asked. Even he couldn't offend her. Okay. The luckiest thing that happened to me in my life was meeting old Shao. Lei Ju gazed outside through the divine light. He looked at the Alliance army in the north, tried to find Shao Yi and face like cream. But he was afraid that if he did, they would see him. Finally, he closed his eyes. After a long time, he slowly opened his eyes. "Qin Hao, do you know that I will never lose unless I don't want to win? From now on, this place is up to you." After Lei Ju finished speaking, the sunset peak in the outside world shook. The entire peak began to collapse. Suddenly, a beam of light shot out from the peak. The peak suddenly split open. The speed of the light was extremely fast. Only a few unblemished void cultivators could vaguely see that the light seemed to wrap around a heart, a bright red heart. By the time they realized what was going on, the light had shattered. It turned into billions of rays of light and scattered across the East Continent. Every time the light fell, the earth veins that had been damaged by the Battle of the Emperors began to repair quickly. But the heart was the true source of evil for the evil gods. Only when the source of evil was destroyed would the evil souls disappear completely. Qin Hao watched the heart of evil explode. His heart trembled. What a terrifying opponent. Zhang Wu probably didn't expect that the evil gods would bury their hearts in the sunset peak. As expected, if he only killed the evil souls or Lei Ju, who still had a trace of humanity, he wouldn't be able to destroy the evil spirits. The evil souls would never lose unless they didn't want to win. Farewell, Uncle Yin. Qin Hao suppressed the throbbing of his heartstrings. When he retracted his gaze, the thunder mantra in front of him had already been destroyed along with the evil heart. Extreme evil gave birth to a bright red heart. It was born from the darkness of the abyss and finally filled the devastated land of the divine wilderness. Perhaps it was because he wanted to thank Qin Hao for taking care of Yin Rushuang, or perhaps it was because Yin Laobei had truly resolved the countless obsessions he carried on his back. He had comprehended the meaning of the divine way from the grass in Qin Hao's palm. That was why he helped the East Continent repair the earth veins. "Pauper, go away. You dirted my clothes. Can you afford to pay for it? What's the use of working hard? You worked so hard, but in the end, the spot was taken by my family. No girl will like you. They only worship wealth and status. Why did you hurt your fellow disciple? Get out of here. You're no longer a disciple of our sect. I heard you wanted to use the herb to save your wife. Sorry, it's mine now. There's no such thing as fairness in the world. Why do you always want fairness? Be realistic. Your talent is very good. It's hard to come by in 100 years. However, the Grand Elder only accepts one personal disciple. You're not worthy." Countless desolate scenes shattered in front of the Pill Emperor's eyes. The various states of the human world, all kinds of unfortunate encounters, ultimately created many peerless powerhouses. However, those misfortunes took root in the hearts of the powerhouses, and in the end, they were trapped on the path of divine Tao, evolving into extreme evil. Chapter 1951. The heavenly path of the divine wilderness allowed Qin Hao to see the origin of the evil. It wasn't the fault of the divine palace. From the beginning, the injustice of the mortal world was the root of the evil. The divine palace was only the trigger point. Qin had to know what kind of life Yin Laobei had experienced. He was oppressed by the rich, he wasn't recognized by the elders, his wife died of illness, or maybe he had encountered all kinds of misfortunes. But there was one thing. Yin Laobei had always kept the kindness in his heart. He always had a good heart for the world, but he hid this kindness and goodness in his bright red heart and buried it in the sunset peak. If not for this, Array Emperor, Yin wouldn't have been separated by the evil soul and forcefully separated from Lei Ju from the evil soul. Because as long as Yin Laobei was there, the evil soul would always have that humanity. This was a kind of irony to the evil soul. The evil soul belonged to the extreme of evil, but Yin Laobei was a ray of light born in the abyss. Although his life was bleak, his light wasn't extinguished. Qin Hao recalled the past of the Divine Palace. Before entering the Seven Peaks, the evil soul that disguised itself as the black-robed Emperor Yuan in the Imperial Bay must have been influenced by Yin Laobei, which was why it repeatedly stopped him from entering the Divine Palace. Later, Yin Laobei could only give up and let the evil soul refine him. Unfortunately, both Array Emperor Yin and the evil soul underestimated Qin Hao. Plus, Muri's change gave Dendi a chance to escape from the Divine Palace. Whoosh! As the divine light dissipated, Qin Hao stepped out. He sighed in his heart. The divine desolate land should indeed change. Although the evil source had been destroyed, as long as the world was still unjust, 1,000 years later, or even 10,000 years later, it was hard to guarantee that a second calamity would occur. The place where evil was born was the human heart. Who is he? What did you say to him? Zhan Wu saw Qin Hao's worry. Could it be that he let Lei Ju go? What does it have to do with you? Qin Hao left Zhan Wu's side and walked towards the huge emperor's throne. He had protected him for 4 generations. This kind of friendship was far beyond family. It was hard for him to repay him. However, this guy dared to call himself brother while he was still in a coma. He really deserved a beating. You remember everything. Zhan Wu's eyes flashed. He looked at Qin Hao's back, pretending to be cold and aloof. It was a familiar feeling from the primeval realm. A little. Qin Hao's laughter came back, and he was already on the throne. Han Lingxian had to deal with him. At this time, the ancestral lord, Feng Lan, Zhan Lang, Mu Yue, and many other unblemished experts and emperors surrounded Han Lingxian. Muri, who was using Xiao Han's body, held the Xiantian sword of the Xiantian celestial lord and stared coldly at Emperor Lingxian. Bao Er was there too. Han Lingxuan's appearance was very miserable. Both of her eyes were blinded, her long hair was messy, and her body was covered with wounds. Her noble imperial robe was torn to shreds, and she was waving her imperial whip around like a crazy woman. The whip's afterimages frightened Han Qingji so much that she didn't dare to move forward. Because of her special identity, the ancestral lord, Muri, and the others couldn't kill Emperor Lingxian directly. So, they waited for Qin Hao to deal with her. Qingji Han was Han Lingxuan's hidden trump card. At the critical moment, she suddenly burst out with the demonic I will, causing great trouble to the souls of Zhan Lang and the others. Except for Xin Yue, the other 3 were severely injured. In fact, if Bao Er hadn't restrained the first princess of the East Continent to a certain extent, it would have been difficult for Muri to restrain her. Bao Er's spiritual attack was very fierce. Probably the divine item that Qin Hao left on her plate of roll. This girl wasn't afraid of Qingji Han's demonic eye of annihilation at all. Who dares to touch me? I am Emperor Lingxian, Denda's lover. The person he loves the most in his life is me. I will let him kill all of you. The crazy words mixed with the wind of the whip made the experts of the 5 realms feel a chill. As the gentle footsteps came, the crowd surrounding Han Lingxian automatically opened up a path. They watched as the calm Denda slowly walked forward. She's very dangerous. Muri cautiously stared at Han Lingxian, who was wildly swinging her whip. She reached out a hand to try to stop Qin Hao, and she said Xiao Han's voice. Qin Hao patted Xiao Han's hand, indicating that it was okay, and walked forward alone. Strangely, the moment Qin Hao approached, the crazy woman in the field suddenly quieted down. The sharp whip in her hand slipped, and she stared with empty eyes. She groped with her palms, and tears flowed down her face as she murmured, Qin Hao, is it you? Qin Hao, I can't see you. I can't see you anymore. They blinded my eyes. It's me. Qin Hao reached out and held Han Lingxuan's blood-stained palms. Qin Hao, you're back, Sob. You're back. Han Lingxian threw herself into Qin Hao's arms and cried loudly. The experts of the 4 realms couldn't bear to look at her bloody and teary face. If she had known this would happen, she wouldn't have done it in the first place. Han Lingxian had personally destroyed her beautiful life and the happiness she had. Qingji Han's body trembled slightly. She looked at the Empress, who had always been high and mighty. Even though she was the adopted daughter and the first princess of the East Continent, she was still like a servant with no status in front of Emperor Lingxian. She had never seen Han Lingxian cry, let alone throw herself into a man's arms and cry like this. It was simply unimaginable. But now, the incomparably powerful Empress of Daqin was crying blood and tears in Dinda's arms like a little woman. She no longer had the slightest bit of Emperor's might. It was truly moving. Xiao Han watched from afar. Although she felt a little uncomfortable at first, she quickly adjusted. Qin Hao and Han Lingxian had known each other before her. She had also accompanied Dinda through many ups and downs. Today, she had fallen to such a state and was not tolerated by the Five Realms. As someone who was about to die, she should be more magnanimous. Mu Yue's performance was also very quiet. She silently held Xiao Han's hand. She knew how much Qin Hao had loved Han Lingxian. It was once something she could only wish for. However, the amount of love he had in the past was the amount of pain in Qin Hao's heart now. Even though she had become Qin Hao's wife, Mu Yue could still stand from an objective point of view and feel great regret and pity for the fate between Han Lingxian and Dendi. Is the evil soul dead? Han Lingxian raised her head and tried to speak in the gentle tone she used to accompany Dendi. It's dead, Qin Hao said. My current appearance must be very ugly and frightening. She laughed. Even she felt that she was ugly. Lingxian, the sovereigns of the Five Realms, are watching. I have to give the sovereigns an explanation. You should end your own life. Qin Hao let go of Han Lingxuan's hand. This was the last bit of gentleness he could give. Wait. Han Lingxian panicked. Like a little girl lost in the darkness, she hurriedly held Qin Hao's hand tightly. What other unfulfilled wishes do you have? I can help you. Qin Hao said, if I say, I want to stay by your side, will you still be willing? Han Lingxian said. Then, she lowered her head with a bitter smile. You are not willing. I have harmed you. I am not worthy, right? Great Emperor Lingxian, Dinda has done his best. You only have yourself to blame. We have no time to listen to your words of love. Save yourself some dignity. Old ancestor Hai Dong shouted. Who do you think you are? Han Lingxian stared in the direction of the voice with a pair of blood-red eyes. Although she had lost her eyes, old ancestor Hai Dong did not dare to look directly at her. He subconsciously shrank back. Haha, I only have myself to blame. I deserve it. Han Lingxian let go of Qin Hao's hand and tried hard not to cry. Qin Hao, have you ever loved me? Xiao Han's heart suddenly tightened. I used to love you. Qin Hao answered very straightforwardly. It was only in the past. Shameless. Bauer pouted, leaned forward, and scolded. Han Lingxian heard it and ignored it. She nodded and said, That's enough. Can you hug me again? The more Bao listened, the angrier she became. Xiao Han shook his head at Bao. I'm a man with 2 wives and a daughter. Qin Hao said, Consider it a farewell between friends. Han Lingxian said. Qin Hao turned around and looked at Xiao Han and Vivian. The two did not say anything. Bao turned her head to the side, and her face was filled with displeasure. Fine. Qin Hao took a step forward and opened his wide arms. Whoosh! At that instant, a black light shot out from Han Lingxuan's mouth. It was filled with unblemished laws and shot toward the space between Qin Hao's eyebrows. Danger! This venomous woman, Hai Dong, White Emperor, and the others were startled. At such a close distance, Qin Hao's face was almost touching hers. Be careful. Xiao Han threw the profound heaven sword in his hand. It flew past Qin Hao's cheek and accurately pierced through Han Lingxuan's head. The sword ray flew past the back of her head. Qin Hao sighed and turned his head. She didn't want to injure me. After reaching the divine path, the evil soul could not even withstand a single palm strike from him. No matter how fierce Han Lingxian was, how could she injure a god like him? The moment she attacked, it melted under the heavenly Tao. Xiao Han came back to his senses, and his expression changed greatly. Han Ling Xian's body fell to the ground. The lifeless, immortal Emperor Ling Xian had a look of regret on her face. She could die, but she didn't want to commit suicide. She wanted to die in Qin Hao's hands. She didn't finish her sentence. That year, before she returned from the God Burial Valley, she didn't betray the Pill Emperor. It was only after she returned with Zhang Wu that she was bewitched by the evil soul and forced to kill Zhang Lang's group of 4. However, Dinah would never hear her explanation. Dong! The Empress's body fell onto the huge, ice-cold throne with a loud thud. At this moment, the throne that stretched across the void started to disintegrate into specks of light due to Han Lingshuan's will of Wei dissipating. Qin Hao looked at the first princess of the East Continent and said, "Take her away." Han Qingji gritted her teeth and leaped forward. She picked up Great Emperor Ling Xian's corpse and disappeared into the void. Dindi, everyone was startled. He was digging up the roots of the problem. "I am the god of the heavenly Tao." Qin Hao turned around and faced the various thearchs. In an instant, his divine might was hard to resist. The incomparably resplendent heavenly wheel of the great Tao revolved around his imposing body. Under the divine radiance, the various thearchs were reduced to black and white. Chapter 1952. Guqin music flowed. Taosheng, the 9th island lord of Fenghua's 9th tribe, sat cross-legged in the air as he played the Guqin. Beside him, Jiangzhu, the 5th island lord, held her soul-suppressing orb in her left hand. Her right hand gathered Monarch techniques and triggered a terrifying spiritual attack, trapping a Qin imperial city general in a golden robe. At this moment, the Guqin music and spiritual attack combined and wrapped around Tai Wei, sacred lord, making it difficult for him to use his will. Yin Roseflower, plucking hand, shot forward. Her 5 fingers flew forward as she tried to crush Tai Hui's head. Swoosh! A battle spear fell from the sky and collided with the flower-picking hand's aura, shattering it into pieces. The number 1 general of the Qin imperial city, flawless Great Emperor Tiando, waved his hand and dispersed the Guqin music and spiritual light that trapped Tai Hui, freeing him. "Let them go." Sword Master Zheng Ji Shou Wuk flew over and stood in front of Yin Ro, Taosheng, and Jiangzhu Island Lord. He looked at Tiando and Tai Wei. The evil calamity had been eliminated. Great Emperor Ling Xian was dead. This battle was over. This was Dinda's order. It was also the order of the heavenly Wei. Not only Tiando and Tai Wei, but everyone else in Qin Imperial City could leave. Anyone can leave, but not him. A brawny man dragged a lava stick with flowing lava and ran out of the North Territory Army. He was full of murderous intent and stared at Singang with bloodshot eyes. Singang smiled bitterly and sighed deeply. He said to the ape master, "All right, let's end this with this stick." He killed the ape ancestor. The golden great apes and the demon emperors would not let him go. Roar! The ape master let out a roar and took large strides towards Singang. As he ran, he revealed his giant ape form. It was as if a mountain had appeared out of thin air. Golden fur covered his entire body. The lava cudgel in his hand was like a mountain that came crashing down. Singang roared at the same time. He swept out thousands of stick shadows that merged into one. He swung out a black stick shadow that was 100 feet long and collided with the ape master. Boom! The air trembled violently, and the 2 staff shadows were destroyed at the same time. At this moment, an ape's palm that was covered in hair reached out and pressed down on Singang's head. As the ape master suddenly exerted force, it ignored Singang's will of the Wei attack and crushed Singang on the spot. Hao looked over. Ancestor was killed by Si-San's father. Now, and Si-San's father had killed Singang. Let's stop here. He looked down at the remnants of the Qin imperial city from Tiando and said, "You have aided the evildoer in his evil deeds and should have been erased from the heavenly axiom. However, since you are acting under orders and have no choice, I will give you a chance to start over." After the Yuanling era, the 4 regions became devoid of gods. Today, I have cultivated the divine path and have gained the recognition of the heavenly axiom. I will not let the divine path continue to be interrupted. Qin Hao's voice became more and more majestic. The heavenly way was dazzling. His will spread across the 5 realms and the 4 regions. His will appeared in every piece of land. Let's build the divine pavilion. Mortal martial artists can enter the divine pavilion and comprehend the divine decree. The divine pavilion will be controlled by the overlord orthodoxies. The war immortal guards will be called immortal guards. They will check all the candidates. Those who take advantage of the situation will be killed. When Qin Hao said this, his divine might fell directly on the great emperors of the orthodoxies. He wanted absolute fairness and justice. Even the supreme martial artists of the Alliance army, who had helped him in the war, could not casually stuff people into the divine pavilion. Building the divine pavilion. Establishing a divine orthodoxy. We can comprehend the divine decree. Gosh, we will all have the chance to become gods. Ancestor Hai Bi was so excited that his body trembled. Yes, God. The great emperors bowed respectfully. Dindu was the only one who could obtain the divine decree. All the great emperors would have the chance to become gods. Moreover, the divine pavilion was controlled by the various orthodoxies. Undoubtedly, the overlord orthodoxies would be the first to comprehend the divine path. Obviously, Qin Hao had given them a lot of convenience. However, there was one rule. Those who did not comprehend the emperor's path could not enter the divine pavilion. No one dared to take advantage of the situation. The immortal guards in charge of the assessment were not just for show. Tian Do, are you willing to join the immortal guards and supervise the assessment of the divine pavilion in the Qin Imperial City? Qin Hao looked over. I, Tian Do, am willing to follow God's will and join the immortal guards. Tian Do looked at Qin Hao for a long time. However, he did not see any threat in his eyes. If he left, Dindu would not make things difficult for him. However, Qin Hao had given him a chance to start over. He had even handed the assessment of the divine pavilion to him. How could he let him down? I, Tai Hui, am willing to follow God's will and join the immortal guards. Tai Hui knelt in the void with one knee in front of Qin Hao. Think carefully. I am not a divine guard for nothing. Since I have entered the divine pavilion, I have to brand my divine seal. Qin Hao said solemnly. I am willing. Tai Hui agreed before his brother. Good. Qin Hao's eyes flashed. An array of light was planted between Tai Hui and Tian Do's eyebrows. Soon, the mark of the great void cauldron appeared between the eyebrows of the 2 brothers. It was exquisite and pocket-sized like a blooming cinnabar. When the mark appeared, their temperament also changed, and an invisible force of divine decree was emitted. Aren't you giving your life to him? Tian Do grumbled. Joining the immortal guards was to get a chance to enter the divine pavilion. Otherwise, they would not be able to enter. Who would have thought that Tai Hui would be so naive? Brother, you were not killed by the divine master, and you have become a true divine general. What is there to be unhappy about? Tai Hui said. Tian Do immediately blushed. Chapter 1953. With the divine emblem imprinted between their eyebrows, Tian Do and Tai Hui looked even more extraordinary. Their appearances were also more in line with the heavenly path divine generals. Moreover, through the divine emblem, they felt a strange connection with Qin Hao. It was as if they had obtained some kind of great power out of nowhere. This power flowed through their bodies, blood, will, and even their souls. It was boundless, majestic, and vast. Divine power. Tian Do and Tai Hui looked at each other in disbelief. It felt so real. Under Dilly's control, this energy could move along with their will. They did not doubt that they could use it directly. Qin Hao smiled and said, the divine emblem is not a shackle. It can also protect you and increase your strength. However, according to your Emperor's Path Foundation, you cannot rely on it too much. Since they had joined the divine guards, he would not mistreat them. Through the resonance between the divine emblem imprint and God's will, Tian Do and Tai Hui could more or less comprehend some of the heavenly path's mysteries. However, using divine power in the body of an emperor was very taxing. Unless it was absolutely necessary, it was best not to use it. Thank you, Divine Lord. Tai Hui was so excited that his body trembled. Being a divine guard seems pretty good. Tian Do thought and nodded with satisfaction. It was as if his sense of existence had become even more superior. Let's disperse. The various orthodoxies have contributed greatly to eliminating the disaster in the divine wilderness. The divine pavilion will be handed over to you as a reward from the heavenly path. It is not easy to cultivate martial arts, and it is even harder to prove one's divinity. In the future, it will depend on your own luck. After 3 days, the Qin Imperial Palace will send a miracle. Qin Hao said, "Yes, Divine Lord." The emperors bowed and accepted the order. They were all very excited. The battle had ended. Streams of people left one after another. The 9 lineages of Phoenix Flower, White Moon Pavilion, Shuo clan, 7 heroes of the southern region, demons of Ape Island, and other forces were looking for their disciples who had survived the battle and were preparing to bring the injured back. However, at this moment, Qin Hao's gaze fell on the void in the distance. His divine consciousness covered the boundless space and seemed to see something strange happening there. He could not help but frown. It's them. Zhan Wu also felt it, and he stared at God Burial Valley. The seal of the Devil region was loosening. Back then, during the Battle of the Gods, the souls of the foreign experts that were trapped by the 10 cutlass great demons were awakening one after another. They were breaking out of their seals. At this moment, Qin Hao's will descended upon the demonic domain with a single thought. He ignored the Yellow Springs Gate and appeared at the end of the demonic domain. Back then, the 7 thrones had formed an array formation, and the soul-suppressing demonic sword had been stabbed into the center. Since Zhou Wudao had pulled out the devil sword and lost the suppression of the devil weapon of 10 underworlds, as Zhan Wu had said, streaks of incomplete souls began to emerge from the cracked devil soil one after another. They transformed into soul lights that filled the sky and flew everywhere, passing through the gate of the underworld and heading towards the East Continent. These remnant souls from the outer realms sensed the aura of living people from the East Continent. Among them, they gathered into a huge torrent and headed straight for the Sunset Peak. Most of the martial emperors were here, and they wanted to possess someone and be reborn. What's going on? Heaven Do took a step forward and immediately blocked in front of Qin Hao like a loyal guard. His battle-thirsty eyes looked around. If he discovered any abnormalities, he would definitely kill those who dared to blaspheme the dignity of the gods in front of the Pill God. Now that he had joined the Divine Guards, Qin Hao was his Divine Lord. Blaspheming Qin Hao's dignity was equivalent to trampling on Heaven Do's dignity. He definitely couldn't tolerate it. "It's fine," Qin Hao said indifferently. Heaven Do's performance was pretty good. Following which, Qin Hao stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers. Buzz! A gust of heavenly Tao wind suddenly appeared and swept out crazily. When it flew out from the side of Heaven Do's body, it instantly turned into a boundless hurricane that engulfed heaven and earth. The flickering god power was extremely terrifying, and it seemed like it could tear the East Continent into nothingness. One by one, the Emperor Lords looked at the hurricane with incomparable shock. This power was simply terrifying. However, they were very clear that Qin Hao hadn't used all of his power. Otherwise, even the heavenly Tao wouldn't be able to withstand it. The spiritual energy of the heavens would go berserk, and the heavenly Tao would collapse. It would definitely fall into chaos. How many years has it been? Finally, we have appeared. Warm light, gentle wind, such sweet spiritual energy. Damned divine desolate demon king. I want to slaughter all the living beings in this plane. Use their blood to welcome our new life, huh? Oh, what is that? God power. How is it possible? No! Savage words resounded throughout the sky, and in the end, they were drowned out by the hurricane. The souls that had been sealed in the demon realm for 10,000 years didn't welcome a new life. Instead, they were thrown into the abyss of death. Soon, the 10,000 souls that had been pressed into the demon realm by the 10-headed demons disappeared without a trace. Under the divine path, false gods, and evil souls couldn't even withstand a single blow, let alone these nirvana realm and unblemished realm divine souls. Moreover, most of them were extremely weak. If gods hadn't been born, it would have been a headache for them to come out. Zhang Wu sneered and mocked, then turned his head. Where did he go? He went to the Qin imperial city. Lu said to the stunned sunset battle god. He truly ignored space and moved with a thought. Now, in this divine wilderness, there was no place that could stop Dindi. Or perhaps he should be called the Alchemy god. 3 days later, at the Qin imperial palace. Don't be late. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite. Zhang Wu caught the experts of various orthodoxies and warned them sternly. Battle intent particles filled the air and disappeared in front of the emperor's eyes. We didn't provoke him. Who could they find a reason with? The group of supremes of the 5 realms had inexplicably become punching bags. They didn't have the experience of winning, and it felt terrible. Chapter 1954. All the emperors returned to their sect and counted the casualties. Qin Hao wanted them to reorganize for 3 days. There must be a reason for that. As for the remnant souls from the outer region that had broken out of the barren island, Qin Hao had secretly resolved the crisis that was enough to throw the 5 realms into chaos. The emperors naturally did not know about it. The Battle of Sunset Peak ended. On this day, the scene of the apocalypse was deeply engraved in the hearts of the people of the East Continent. However, at the same time, Dindi proved his divinity, and Israel descended upon the 4 regions and 5 realms. All the people and cultivators felt the appearance of the divine will. The barren mountains glowed with new life, and the spiritual chi between heaven and earth became more abundant. The sky was bluer than before, and the water was clearer. The filth in the world seemed to have been swept away overnight. Qin Hao controlled the heavenly path. Under the adjustment of the divine will, all living things were nourished. The deficiencies and flaws that existed in the past were repaired, and the heavenly path became more perfect and perfect. On this day, the people worshipped the divine position, burned incense, and sang praises to the gods. They prayed for the safety of their families and for the future of their children. The cultivation world was even more shaken. The warriors of the 4 regions were moved to tears. From now on, the imperial path was no longer a restriction. The divine wilderness had its own guardian deity. Qin Hao naturally felt the commotion in the outside world. Now, his divine will had merged with the heavenly path. Any change in the mortal world could appear in his divine will. To him, the people of the 4 regions were all children, and there was no distinction between them. Of course, birth, old age, illness, and death were part of the cycle of the heavenly path. He would not deliberately change or reverse it. What he could do was to create a better living space for all living things. This was the responsibility of a god. 3 days later, Qin Imperial City. The Imperial City had been successfully captured by the Western Liang Army, led by Qin Hao. A long time ago, Qin Hao had started to train an elite army. After he left, Haidafu had been in charge of this matter. From a selection of soldiers to the equipping of weapons and armor, the quality of the soldiers and the quality of the weapons were all top-notch. When the Shiliang army entered Daqin, Gongshu Jian's Mecha Legion made a great contribution. This steel force caught the other legions of Daqin off guard. The ancient mecha technique was very strong. As long as there were enough crystals, its power was much stronger than that of an ordinary army. When Sayogwa came back from the Divine Palace, he gave Gongshu Jian a new design plan. He used the giant mecha made of steel to replace the wooden mecha technique. Han Lingshuan's legion could not stop him at all. On the other hand, when they were besieging the Qin Imperial City, the defending army had put up a strong resistance. The mecha army had suffered heavy losses. If Song Ziyang hadn't saved him in time, Gongshu Jian would have died. In the defending army, although Han Lingxian did not leave behind the true Self-Emperor's Dao, there were 2 extreme Dao validation experts. They were quite strong. No one around Qin Shilong could suppress these 2 extreme Dao validation experts. Only when Qin Yun and the others came to save the formation did they successfully break into the city. Fortunately, Xiaohan was cautious and asked Lian Han and Zhong Liqing to come together. Otherwise, it would not have been easy for Qin Yun and Yi Shuihan to break into the city. Even so, Zhan Yu was still severely injured. At this moment, in front of the vast buildings of the Imperial Palace, there was an extremely spacious field. In the past, this was the place where Qin Hao specially rewarded the generals of Daqin. After 600 years, the Imperial Palace had maintained its original appearance. Therefore, the field was still there. Today, as far as the eye could see, the field was filled with figures. The orthodoxies were lined up neatly in square formations. The lords of the 4 domains and 5 realms had come in person. The whole body exuded a majestic aura of millions of lions. However, no one was making a ruckus. There was no noise at all in the crowd. The atmosphere was abnormally quiet, and there was a strong sense of solemnity and solemnity. In the southern domain, Qilin Dao sect, Water Jade Palace, Vajra Court, the Dao Ancestor, and Buddha the Arch were in the front. In the northern domain, Phoenix Flower 8 lineages, Island Lords, and Ape Island's demon races leaders were Paragon Fonlon and Father of Sea Sand, Ape Lord. In the middle domain, Zhuiying Sword Palace, White Lunar Pavilion, Judgment Hall. In the western domain, the Warring States Kim people and the Poisoned Dao Miao people had all arrived. In the eastern domain, Jixia Academy's Tai off 4 palaces, 7-star Herb Court, Eastern Seas Shuo clan. The 7 heroes of the southern domain, the Shao and Qi Thearchs of the northern border, and the Western Liang army were guarding the periphery of the field. It was a magnificent sight. Early this morning, the lords of the orthodoxies had brought their disciples and waited here for a long time. Everyone outside is here. In the Imperial Palace, the Sunset Battle God spoke to Dendi. Qin Hao looked helplessly at Zhan Wu, not knowing what to say. The Sunset Battle God had ordered the 5 realms patriarchs to come to the Imperial Palace before dawn. They had been standing here until now. In fact, there was no need for them to be so anxious. "Let's go," Qin Hao said, and took the lead to walk out, side by side with the Sunset Battle God. Behind them, Tian Do, Zhan Lu, Zhu Xiu, and Zhan Lang followed. They were all unblemished experts. Greetings to the Supreme Divinity, Sunset Battle God. As soon as Qin Hao and Zhan Wu appeared, their voices reverberated throughout the vast arena, shaking the heavens. Everyone bowed slightly to show their respect. Now, Dinder represented the heavenly path of the divine wilderness and was the god of all living beings. In the battle against evil, the orthodoxies fought with me. Today, besides handing over the divine pavilion seal, there are some things that you must do. Qin Hao stood above the imperial palace and spoke in a clear voice. We will do our best to fulfill the orders of the divine will. Emperor Bai, Ocean Destroyer, and the others said respectfully. Qin Hao smiled and shook his head. No, this is not for you to do. I will do it. This, Ocean Destroyer did not understand. What did the divine will need to do personally for the matters of the world? If the divine will had to do all the trivial things, they would be useless. If this matter were to spread to other planes one day, people would laugh at the incompetence of the divine wilderness emperor path. The seal of the 14 primordial spirit gods had not been lifted yet, but Ocean Destroyer Ancestor had already thought of other planes. This old man was very far-sighted. Listen quietly, Emperor Bai whispered. The Alchemy god's arrangements naturally had his reasons. If he spoke too much, he would be thrown out by the Sunset Battle God. Understand your thoughts. As the ruler of the heavenly path, it is impossible for me to do everything personally. In the future, I will not interfere in the mortal world. However, this is something that you cannot do. Qin Hao said, Divine will resurrect the souls of the dead in the battle against evil. Zhan Wu shouted solemnly. Chapter 1955. Souls of the Dead. Resurrection. These 4 simple words instantly silenced the Imperial Palace's martial arts arena. Resurrection was a combination of thousands of beautiful things, carrying infinite hope and possibilities. The past could only be imagined and hoped for. Today, Qin Hao performed a miracle to bring the dead back to life. The emperors were speechless. It was indeed a miracle, and they could not do it. Qin Hao looked down calmly. At this moment, his body was filled with noble divine light. His will merged with the heavenly axiom, and he was the heavenly axiom's incarnation. He raised his hand and swept out a dazzling brilliance. Suddenly, the heavenly axiom's power descended upon the imperial palace's martial arts arena. Transparent souls were born in the open space, and as the divine power condensed, they gradually became corporeal. Soon, the silhouettes of the bodies became clearer and clearer, until they became the most familiar faces of the orthodoxies. Buzz, an enormous body that was as majestic as a mountain, was the first to release a powerful aura of life. Divine light soared into the sky and enveloped the entire area. The giant ape ancestor, who had fought the Pichu giant and valley master Shinon before being killed by Tsingang with a single strike, slowly opened his ape eyes. Then Meng Xiang, who was attacked by Jin Shun and Yun Ro, as well as Zhou Wenyi's sneak attack, appeared after the ape ancestor. Gu Che, the armored god of war guards, and the emperors of the 5 realms who died in the battle were all born in the divine light. Their souls were recovered from the heavenly axiom, and their bodies were condensed by Qin Hao's divine power. They appeared in the martial arts arena alive, and countless people could not help but scream, "I'm still alive!" The ape ancestor spoke the first sentence after his resurrection. He looked at the millions of people in a daze. Meng Xiang, Gu Che, and many other emperors in the martial arts arena had the same expression as the ape ancestor. They felt that it was unreal. However, as Si San's father wailed and knelt down heavily in front of Qin Hao, this illusion was completely shattered. Only then did the revived people wake up with a start and realize that they were indeed alive. My God! The great golden ape clan leader, the future master of Ape Island, and all the demon sovereigns knelt on the ground and cried like a child. During the shocking battle at Sunset Peak, they were forced to rely on Qin Hao in the final tribulation. But now they were completely convinced by the divine path. God! Many emperor lords knelt down. He was a true god. Qin Hao had single-handedly reversed the heavenly Tao and brought his family, teachers, friends, lovers, and disciples back to their side. He did not neglect the living and gave them a complete person. Qin Hao nodded slightly. At this moment, the divine light on his body became even more dazzling. He could clearly feel that the power of faith of all living beings had become even more intense. Vaguely, his celestial wheel was also undergoing some kind of change. After retrieving the fragmented memories of his first life, Qin Hao knew that his realm was rising to a higher level. The so-called divine Tao of the mortal world was actually also a realm. It was stronger than the Emperor Tao, but it was still far from being a true god. Perhaps only the god-kings of the primeval realm were worthy of being called the true gods of the primeval age. Qin Hao waved his sleeve, and another wave of divine light fell down. One after another, the bodies of the dead returned to the field of vision. The dead disciples of the various orthodoxies, the warriors of the Phoenix God clan, and the Proud God clan. Tens of thousands of dead people lined up neatly in a square formation. The aura of death faded away, and their vitality was reignited. Every time the divine light covered the area, countless people would return. Following this, every time the disciples of the White Lunar Pavilion, the Shuo clan, and the Jueying Sword Palace returned, the elders and emperors of the various sects knelt before Qin Hao. Gradually, more and more people appeared. The spacious martial field was no longer sparse, and it was even a little crowded. When the Sea tribe and the Pichu giants appeared, a huge commotion broke out in the square formations of the orthodoxies. The atmosphere became tense in an instant. The flow of people separated like a tide, and the Sea tribe was divided into 2 areas. Waves of divine light raged from the various forces. They were in a tense standoff with the Sea tribe. If Qin Hao was not present, a fierce battle would have broken out in the next second. Supreme God, our people have been revived. Why did you let the Sea tribe come back? Emperor Bai said loudly. It was not a question, but a question. Everyone, be careful of them. The demon lords of Ape Island looked at the tall and burly Pichu giants with one eye and crooked mouths. These ugly and smelly lowly races did not deserve to live in the divine wilderness, especially the golden great ape tribe, as if they were the natural enemies of the Pichu tribe. Their hair stood on end, and they were glowing with a blinding light. They had entered battle mode and were about to transform into their demon forms. The Pichu tribe and the Sea tribe were the same. At first, they were confused. Then, they stared nervously at the various orthodoxies and sects of the East Continent. They protected the weak in the center of the formation, and many sorcerers began to chant spells. Silence. Qin Hao uttered calmly. His majestic divine might descended, suppressing the battle intent of the orthodoxies and the people of the four barbarians. Divine light flowed across the arena like a stream of water, flowing from one figure to another. Everyone's tense hearts were calmed down inexplicably. They felt incomparably comfortable under the divine light. However, many pairs of eyes were looking at Qin Hao, waiting for an answer. The Sea tribe and the Pichu tribe are the same as you. They are all living beings of the heavenly path of the divine wilderness. No matter what, you can't erase this fact. Qin Hao said, but Ocean Destroyer had something to say. During the primordial spirit era, the barbarian god was one of the 14 great gods of the human race. The Sea tribe and the Pichu tribe were his people. In order to fight against the extraterritorial powerhouses, he gave up immortality and scattered all his divine power to seal and protect the continent for 10,000 years. That's why the divine wilderness was peaceful for 10,000 years, and why you are here today. Even if it's for the barbarian god, you should give the Sea tribe and the Pichu tribe some space to live. In the battle of exorcism, the heroic deeds of the Sea tribe and the Pichu tribe moved Qin Hao. Like the other orthodoxies, they only wanted to not be wiped out by the turbulence of the divine wilderness. They wanted to fight for a chance of survival for their descendants. For this, they were willing to give it their all. The Sea tribe and the Pichu giants were all killed in battle. Compared to the other orthodoxies, their loyalty was something that many people could not compare to. We don't want our descendants to be slaves when they are reborn. Dindi occupied the East Continent and took away our home. He is guilty to us. Give us land anywhere in the world. We will leave the East Continent and never appear in front of you again. A middle-aged man with a rather strong physique and a tuft of grass-like hair on his head stepped out. He faced the martial arts field and looked straight at the god with an unyielding gaze. This man was the tribe leader of the four barbarians. His cultivation was at the peak of true self. Behind him stood a Pichu giant, whose body size was comparable to the ape ancestor. It was breathing heavily from its nose and glaring at Qin Hao. 3 days ago on the battlefield, it was this giant and the lord of Shinnong Valley who had restrained the ape ancestor. It was from the Pichu tribe. The Pichu giants were not good at communicating with people. Although the East Continent was big, only the Sea tribe understood their thoughts. Wherever the Sea tribe went, the Pichu tribe would follow. If they had to die, they would die together. Even if it was a god, they still dared to resist because they also had a god in their hearts and believed in the barbarian god. There is a wasteland in the middle of western Liang and northern borderline. The environment there is primitive. Although it is not as beautiful as the East Continent, in my opinion, it is more suitable for the Sea tribe and the Pichu tribe to live in. You will like it there, Qin Hao said kindly to the middle-aged man. 600 years ago, he had killed several emperors of the Sea tribe, occupied their land, and established the Daqin Empire. There were indeed places that he could not handle well. Now, Qin Hao was in charge of the Way of Heaven. His state of mind was naturally different from that of the Way of Emperor. It could be considered as making up for it. Moreover, the wasteland was not small. Puyang Shaojun and Puyang Shaolei could not manage it. Letting the Sea tribe and the Pichu tribe go, there would be beneficial for the development and prosperity of the wasteland. Are you willing to migrate? Qin Hao asked. Thump, thump. The Pichu giant patriarch gently punched the middle-aged man's shoulder with his fist. Although he controlled his movements very gently, the middle-aged man still slipped and staggered. The middle-aged man understood the giant's intention and nodded. "We are willing to migrate and never come to the East Continent again." The people of the East Continent despised them, but so did they. Since they could get rid of their hatred, they were naturally willing. "All right." Qin Hao nodded and faced the orthodoxies. "Do you have any objections to this arrangement?" "No," Emperor Bai said. "We respect God's will." The ape master glanced at the Pichu giant. Of course, it was good for these big guys to leave. "Since both sides agree, I will send the Sea tribe and the Pichu tribe away." Qin Hao slowly raised his hand. Wait. A deep and rough voice rumbled. The Pichu tribesman's speech was shaky. His huge body walked past the middle-aged man and carefully came to the front of the imperial palace. He stood in front of Qin Hao. Then, the giant knelt down on one leg and extended his rough hand to Qin Hao. "Qiu Wu is willing to be branded as a divine servant and become a divine servant of God." At this moment, Qiu Wu looked at Qin Hao with a complicated gaze. He had experienced Qin Hao's era of conquest and saw his elders being suppressed by Dendi. Logically speaking, he should hate Qin Hao. However, now that the Pill Emperor had proven his divinity, not only did he revive them, but he was also willing to provide a living space for the descendants of the Bichio clan. That was that. Enmity was enmity, and kindness was kindness. To show their sincerity, the Bichio clan should do something. They believed in the ancient barbarian god and could not believe in a second god. However, as the patriarch, Qiu Wu was willing to be Qin Hao's divine servant. This had nothing to do with the tribe. It was his own intention. He served Qin Hao and still believed in the barbarian god. It did not go against his original intention. "Are you serious?" Qin Hao smiled. He felt that Qiu Wu was quite interesting. The patriarch of the Pichu tribe was his divine servant. What was the difference between him and the entire Pichu tribe obeying Dendi? Qiu Wu was repaying his kindness. "Yes, I'm serious." Qiu Wu raised his head and his eyes shone with sincerity. "All right." Qin Hao pointed his finger forward and a divine light shot out. The divine cauldron was branded on Qiu Wu's chest. At this moment, his will and Qiu Wu's soul were immediately connected. "In that case, I will also plant the divine light of the alchemy god." The four barbarians' middle-aged man raised his head and knelt down on one leg. The four barbarians and the Pichu tribe were together. Qin Hao did not waste any time and also planted a divine halo on the four barbarians' tribe leader's chest. His divine will formed a connection with the other party's soul. Then his eyes flickered and the four barbarians' tribe and the Pichu tribe disappeared from the sight of the orthodoxies. When the four barbarians and the Pichu giants reappeared, they had already landed on the wasteland and were scattered across the territories of the three aristocratic families. Puyang Shaojun had also received Qin Hao's instructions to settle the two tribes down. "Are you satisfied?" Qin Hao asked the people below. "Ha!" The sovereigns of the orthodoxies laughed in unison. Then they realized that it was inappropriate and immediately stopped laughing. Feng Lan would like to ask the supreme divinity, "You are willing to revive the Pichu giants and the four barbarians, but why is there no sign of my Fenghua Wuhuang?" Autarch Feng Lan shouted. In the battle of Evil Slayer, Wuhuang's lineage was killed by the giant spirit. The island lord, the elders, and the disciples were all cut off. Fenghua Wuhuang lost all 8 lineages. Chapter 1956. The North Phoenix Flower Sect had lost one of their orthodoxies, although there were only a handful of unparalleled disciples among the resurrected ones. However, none of the higher-ups were seen. Unparalleled was killed by the evil spirit, and the situation is different from the other orthodoxies. I can't retrieve their souls from the heavenly Tao. At least, I can't do it now. Moreover, with that ability in the future, it will be difficult for me to retrieve their souls. Qin Hao explained in a low voice to Feng Lan and the rest of the island masters. The Unparalleled's bloodline was annihilated by the heavenly Tao, and their souls might no longer exist. Even if they did, they would only be fragments. If they were resurrected with fragments, their souls would not be complete. Moreover, Qin Hao's divine Tao ability was limited. He could not reverse the heavenly Tao and gather the fragments. As time passed, the difficulty would only increase. Even if he was qualified to ascend to the position of the primeval realm's divine king, he might not be able to resurrect unparalleled. That was because the time it took for a broken soul fragment to disappear was very fast. My condolences, Supreme. Uncle Chung sighed. Many of the emperors looked at Feng Lan sympathetically. From Qin Hao's explanation, they could vaguely see that the divine Tao was divided into several levels. Dende had just attained divinity, so he was undoubtedly at the lowest level. To be able to resurrect so many people, he must have reached the limit of his ability. No wonder. At this time, the orthodoxies scanned the resurrected people. Not only did unparalleled's disciples not return, none of those who died due to the evil spirit were resurrected. On that day at Setting Sun Peak, you placed your faith and hope in my will. Thus, the divine power I gave birth to gathered your strength. If anyone here dies, I can use the faith in the divine power to retrieve your soul from the heavenly Tao. Otherwise, I can't. Qin Hao glanced at Mo Xian as he spoke. At the moment of their deaths, Sovereign Lord Moro and the generals of the Nightmare War Cavalry had placed all their hopes on Mo Xian. This power didn't form a connection with Qin Hao. Therefore, even if they died from the curse, they wouldn't be able to revive. Mo Xian smiled bitterly. He could guess some things without the Divine Master's explanation. The Luo Moro clan was Dende's direct descendant. If there was even the slightest chance of revival, the God Lord would never forget it. However, Qin Hao didn't bring Monarch Mo Luo back to Mo Xian's side. This was enough to explain everything. In fact, Mo Xian was content. After the Western Liang army had broken into the imperial city, the elderly and young trapped by Han Lingxian were safe because of the timely rescue. Although there were some unfortunate people who had died in the chaos, at least the Moro tribe was not left alone, and there was still hope for revival. I see. The cultivators of the various orthodoxies nodded, as if they had figured something out. The higher the expectations placed on Qin Hao, the greater the divine power Qin Hao would receive, and the greater the feedback effect would be. It turned out that during the ancient elemental era, the believers left behind by the 14 great gods in the mortal world were not a bunch of blind lunatics. Understanding this, the orthodoxy's faith in Qin Hao became even stronger. Who wouldn't want their lives to be strong? If the monarch were to accidentally die one day, perhaps their sincerity towards God would move Qin Hao. In that case, a second revival would not be impossible. Although Qin Hao had said that he would no longer interfere with the mortal world and that the divine wilderness would still operate according to the original rules, an incomparably loyal believer was still very precious to God, wasn't it? In that case, Supreme Divinity, please revive my disciple, Sikong Shu. Feng Lan said. Sikong Shu had been killed by Zhang Yi and died in the same way as the other orthodoxies. This should work. I almost forgot about this. Qin Hao smiled and nodded. Reviving Sikong Shu was not difficult. Qin Hao's eyes were hazy with golden divine light. His thoughts entered Feng Lan's mind out of thin air. As Feng Lan's body suddenly trembled, a dazzling divine light wrapped around his soul appeared in front of him. Soon, under the condensation of divine power, the illusory soul solidified. Sikong Shu, who was covered in divine aura, returned to the side of Feng Lan's master. Master! Sikong Shu was slightly stunned. Wasn't she dead? Little Shu. Feng Lan suddenly burst into tears. She opened her arms and hugged Sikong Shu. A disciple that she had taught was equivalent to half a daughter. In the distance, among the divine guards standing on both sides of the imperial palace, Zhang Yi, who was in charge of guarding the martial arts arena, smiled and looked at Qin Hao with gratitude. The revival ceremony has ended. May the monarchs of the orthodoxies come forward to receive the divine seal of the divine pavilion. Zhan Wu said solemnly and loudly. Whoosh! The great elder, Feng Lan, Hyuning Wuk, trampling the sea, Li Xiuxing, holy Emperor Jiang. The sovereigns of the 4 regions and 5 realms came forward and stood respectfully in a row, facing Qin Hao above. With the divine seal and the divine pavilion, I hope that you will do your best to cultivate more talents for the divine wilderness and prosper the martial arts of the 4 regions. If there is anyone who has successfully comprehended the divine decree, I will gladly welcome them. Qin Hao laughed heartily. With a wave of his hand, beams of divine light fell onto the hands of the sovereigns, turning into identical divine tripod seals that emitted rays of the great path light. When the divine seal fell into their hands, Uncle Changji and the others suddenly felt a vast power pass through them. They all looked at the divine seal in their hands in surprise. This item contained the divine decree and was very powerful. It definitely surpassed a supreme emperor weapon and could be used as a ritual implement. Among them, Feng Lan felt it the most. The power of the divine seal was no weaker than that of Mengji. The matters of the mortal world will end here. From now on, the 4 regions will still be managed by the orthodoxies. As the ruler of the heavenly path, I will not easily interfere with the rules of the lower worlds. But there's one thing. No matter what you do in the future, whether you fight or cooperate, if you kill too much and affect the operation of the heavenly path, I will personally come and kill you. Qin Hao shouted majestically. He would not interfere with the affairs of the mortal world, because it would affect the fairness of the lower worlds. The orthodoxies could do whatever they wanted. If they were like the evil soul, the gods would personally come and end the culprit. We will remember. The sovereigns trembled. If the ruler of the heavenly path intervened, he would be completely wiped out. Like Lord Wu Huang, there was no possibility of resurrection. There's another thing that needs to be told to the warriors of the 4 regions. Emperor Yin of the Northern Border Array Formation was unfortunately killed while searching for the way to operate the 9 Heavens Gods Punishment Array. Although he died, his Emperor spirit brought the method to me, which played a key role in the battle against evil. A statue of Emperor Yin should be made for everyone to worship. Qin Hao said solemnly. There is such a thing. President Yin of the Northern Border Array Formation Guild? Why haven't I heard of him? There are many masters who care about the people. How do you know all of them? If Emperor Yin didn't bring back the method to delay the battle, the outcome of the battle against evil would be unpredictable. A statue of Emperor Yin should be made for him. Everyone was discussing. Although they had not seen him, the cultivators of the 5 regions were filled with respect for Yin Laobei. He was indeed a worthy Emperor Yin. At this time, only Xiaohan and Bo Changji looked at Qin Hao strangely. Muri's emperor spirit was residing in Xiaohan's body. Bo Changji was a fortune teller. Qin Hao's words were full of loopholes. The method of the God's punishment array was passed down in the divine palace. As a core disciple of the 7 peaks, it was impossible that Yun Yi did not pass the method to Qin Hao. Moreover, if Emperor Yin was so great, why didn't he revive him? Although Muri and the ancestral lord saw through it, they did not say it out loud. They guessed that this unknown Emperor Yin probably had a lot to do with Qin Hao. The situation might be very complicated. Otherwise, Dindi, who controlled the heavenly Tao and became a god, would not lie to the world. Father. When Yin Rushuang heard Qin Hao's explanation, she choked on her sobs and burst into tears. That irresponsible father of his, who had left without saying goodbye, had actually done so much for the 4 regions. Maybe Yin Laobei left quietly because he guessed that he would not return, so he did not say goodbye to her. Laobei, as expected of you. I should have guessed that the array that trapped the evil god that day must have been created by you. In this world, only you have such knowledge of arrays. Xiao Yi could not control his emotions. After the crown princess left, he had barely shed a tear. Today, for the sake of his friendship with Yin Laobei, he could not help but shed a tear. Now you can rest easy. Qin Hao closed his eyes and used his spiritual sense to search the heavenly Tao for traces left behind by the evil god. However, he did not find anything. Chapter 1957. Yin Lao Bei was an individual separated from the evil soul. Although he retained his unique kindness, the two of them came from the same source. If he did not die, he could rely on his evil heart to absorb the resentment of the four regions, and the evil soul would return to the human world sooner or later. Yin Laobei's sacrifice was inevitable. Only his death could end the chaos. After the seal awarding ceremony ended, the supreme martial artist returned to the sect with the people from the orthodoxy and the resurrected. The four regions returned to their original order. From that day onwards, many arrayed deity temples were built. Statues of arrayed deity Yin were placed in the temples for future generations to remember. However, the martial art cultivation world had erected statues of the elixir deity. Overlords, large and small sect, and even bandit gangs all worshipped Qin Hao statue. The elixir deity was the ruler of the heavenly path, the only god in the continent. His divine consciousness looked down on all living beings, and no one disrespected him. The construction of the divine pavilion had completely pushed martial arts to its peak. The four regions sect had started to find talents from various sources. Other than some ancient families, even the overlords had abandoned their old traditions. Regardless of status or background, as long as one's ability was outstanding, the sect would vigorously cultivate and allocate resources to them. It was no longer like before, when it was reserved for direct disciples. The original intention of the divine pavilion was naturally to continue the divine path. If a supreme talent was born from a certain force, he could comprehend the divine decree and become the god of the sect. Naturally, it would be incomparably glorious and eye-catching, and it would be more beneficial for the orthodoxy to become stronger. Of course, before that, the warriors who entered the divine pavilion had to cultivate to the emperor level. This was the threshold. Not entering the divine pavilion without entering the emperor's path was also a rule set by Qin Hao. If a cultivator's ability was too weak, they would not be able to withstand the divine decree and would easily die. The Phoenix Flower sect in the north, the Taoist sect in the south, the Warring States sect, and the Celestial sect in the west, the Zhuiying Sword Palace in the middle, and the Qin Imperial Palace in the east had divine pavilions. Every divine pavilion was guarded by divine guards who were responsible for supervising the assessment. Other than that, the seven heroes of the south, Luo Shui of the western Liang, Shao Qi of the northern borderline, and the Penglai Shuo tribe all had their own divine pavilions. The divine pavilion worshipped the statue of the elixir deity, and there were tens of thousands of scrolls of emperor's techniques. They covered a wide range of subjects, such as elixir studies, weapon refinery, formations, martial arts techniques, and spells. They were unlike the other orthodoxies, who specialized in one area and gathered the best of 100 studies. Furthermore, they were of a very high level and had great power. These emperor techniques were naturally the cultivation techniques that had been passed down in the Divine Palace, including the Daozong Peak's Spirit Wa technique, the Mizang Peak's 9 Palaces War Emperor technique, and the Yaoguang Peak's Heavenly Demon Chaos Divine Melody. They were all stored in the Divine Pavilion for talented geniuses to cultivate. The philosophy of the Celestial Palace did not care about one's background or status. Qin Hao's actions could be considered as continuing the orthodoxy on behalf of the 7 peak venerables of Tianquan and spreading it to the 4 regions. During this period, Qin Hao used the divine power of the elixir deity to gather his fellow disciples who had cultivated in the Divine Palace. Just as Qin Hao had estimated before leaving the Divine Palace, there were more than 300 people. These people were all planted with divine seals and joined the Divine Guards. They cooperated with Zhan Wu's War God Guards and were distributed to the divine pavilions in the 4 regions. Firstly, they supervised the assessment of the divine pavilions, and secondly, they maintained order in the mortal world. After all, Qin Hao could not always concentrate his divine consciousness in the mortal world. That way, the martial artist in the mortal world would have no privacy, and it would be a burden for Qin Hao. At this time, in the Qin Imperial Palace, a group of people with extraordinary temperaments were sitting at the banquet in the main hall. They were all venerables, and the atmosphere was harmonious. The divine wilderness should have changed its name long ago. Now that Big Brother has become a god, why don't we change it to the elixir deity continent? Qi Xiaoguo was holding a wine bottle, exuding the smell of alcohol. It's too vulgar and uncultured. Why don't we call it the elixir deity continent? Yi Shuihan picked up a mouthful of food and chewed as he muttered, "No, no, no. That won't do, that won't do. It's all thanks to Big Brother Zhang Wu's painstaking efforts that the Lord has today. In my opinion, it should be called the Danwu continent." Qing Cheng glanced at Xiaoguo. This guy had followed Master for a lifetime. Why did it seem that he could not do anything except eat? Sunset, the Danjian continent, is decided. Zhang Lang said firmly, as if he would not be polite to anyone who did not agree with him. The Heaven-Do continent is not bad. Tian-Do stroked his chin and muttered to himself. Gradually, the group of people became noisy over the name. Awu, how about the Danjian continent? Qin Hao sat in the main seat and smiled as he asked Zhang Wu, who was beside him. Zhang Wu maintained a stiff expression and said, "We should remove the divine wilderness and change the name. The Danjian continent is very suitable." Not good. Qing Cheng was right just now. No matter what, we have to bring your name along. Qin Hao felt that it was too selfish to call it the Danjian continent. Danjian god? That sounds good. Zhang Wu insisted. No, no. Qin Hao shook his head. If I say it's okay, then it's okay. I'm the god. You have to listen to me. Qin Hao slammed the table and stood up. The Dao ancestor and the Phoenix clan ancestor looked at each other. They were speechless as they watched the two giants at the top of the continent argue. How about the divine continent? At this moment, a fat man in the banquet spoke. Instantly, everyone's gazes shifted over. If it doesn't sound good, we can change it. Hai Dafu met the gazes of the flawless great emperors. He really wanted to leave. Fatty, you're a genius. You can think of such a bad name. Yu Feng held in for a few breaths and finally burst out laughing. The laughter in the hall immediately made Hai Dafu blush. The divine continent, I think it's pretty good. Oh, well, what do you think? Qin Hao tasted it. As long as you think it's good. Zhang Wu still maintained that poker face. Boring. The more Qin Hao looked at Zhang Wu, the more bored he became. This guy was not like this before. He fell into the mortal world and cultivated for a lifetime. Did he become stupid? Divine Master, Sunset War God, the naming of the continent is not urgent. Since you summoned me here today, you must have something important to tell me. The Dao ancestor opened his mouth. He was not being perfunctory. His expression was solemn, as if he had predicted something important. Senior is a senior after all. Even the heavenly Dao cannot escape your prying. Qin Hao nodded and sat back down. He said, in the ancient era of primordial spirits, the 14 great gods and the 7 demon kings joined forces to fight back, resulting in the collapse of the divine path. I think everyone is curious as to what triggered this war of the gods and caused the death of the gods. The atmosphere in the hall suddenly quieted down. Everyone held their breaths and looked at the pill god. They still remembered that during the battle at Sunset Peak, the old Sunset War God had said that the experts from the outer domain were plotting something in the divine wilderness. But no one knew what it was. The power of the original realm. Zhang Wu took over the topic. The power of the original realm? The Dao ancestor was puzzled. What power is that? Actually, this world is not what you see. The divine wilderness is just a drop in the ocean. In the wilderness, there are many plains like the 4 regions of the divine wilderness. They are also called continents. Zhang Wu said slowly. The continents formed an even wider plain. The divine path called it a world. Just like a small sect under an overlord that needed to be ruled by a supreme expert, many continents outside the divine wilderness were also under the rule of an extremely powerful divine master. But the divine wilderness was an exception. Because it was the original realm, it could also be called the origin of the wilderness. Chapter 1958. Why am I getting more and more confused? Feng Lan said embarrassedly. It was too profound for her to understand. You don't need to understand too much. You just need to understand that the divine desolate's heavenly Tao is different from other planes and realms. It is an independent entity. The life forms under the heavenly Tao not only grow quickly, but their abilities are also close to perfection. Zhan Wu's expression was solemn. In other words, the world outside the divine desolate's heavenly Tao isn't perfect? The Phoenix clan ancestor asked tentatively. You can understand it that way. Qin Hao nodded and said, the original realm retains the most perfect Tao from the beginning of the Eldritch world. The heavenly Tao of the other planes has flaws. Because of the flaws in the heavenly Tao, the living beings born also have flaws. As everyone knows, the origin souls of the divine desolate's martial artists are divided into ranks. The higher the rank, the stronger the individual can display. Even monstrous people can challenge those of a higher rank. The life forms born from the perfect heavenly Tao are like high-level origin souls, while the life forms of the other planes are born with inferior constitutions and are innately weak. Can you understand this explanation? Yes. All the Supremes gasped. They didn't expect the divine desolate's heavenly Tao to be so powerful. They lived under such a superior heavenly Tao without knowing it. So they want to seize the divine desolate's heavenly Tao and move their people here. They want to use our heavenly Tao to perfect their bloodline and Tao intent. Uncle Ji was shocked. That's right. By controlling the power of the origin realm, the descendants of the Outlanders can live here and obtain innately perfect power. This way, they will be stronger than the other planes. Zhan Wu had once joined the army of the Outlanders, so he was clear about the plan. However, the Outlanders didn't expect that the Origin Spirit 14 gods would be so powerful even though their divine grade wasn't high. Even with the participation of many planes, they still couldn't take down the divine desolate. Dragon Man, Yinming rose up and killed a large number of gods. May I ask, War God, what the outside world is like? Sword Master Hyuning asked curiously. There are fire domain, water domain, ice domain, sword domain. For example, the fire domain plane. There are only flames there. All life forms can only use flames and can't sense other elements. Zhan Wu said, this was an innate disadvantage. As for the divine wilderness, it gathered the power of all living things in the wilderness. The heavenly Tao was filled with all sorts of elements. Even though warriors had different attributes after they were born, for example, those who were proficient in fire would have very powerful fire spells. They lived under the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness, so they could more or less sense other elements. Therefore, they had a certain resistance. The world outside the heavenly path of the divine wilderness did not have any resistance to other elements. Perhaps their flames or swordsmanship were very powerful, but when they suddenly encountered a power they had never encountered before, it was very difficult for them to adapt in a short period of time. Some powerful cultivators even failed miserably and were killed by weaker cultivators from other planes. Of course, due to the purity of the elements, if one were to cultivate the flames to the extreme, the power would be extremely terrifying. Take Flawless Head, for example. The true Extreme Sword Master was a pure sword heart and sword soul. In the way of the sword, Flawless Head's strength could be said to be one of a kind. There was basically no one who could compete with him. Once a cultivator with such an extreme nature refined his will to a certain extent, he would be like a god of slaughter. Tiando and Tai Wei were also like him, including Yi Shuihan and Chun Wanqin. Is it? Take Emperor Yuan of the Divine Desolate. If he didn't die prematurely, under normal circumstances, he would be able to become an emperor in at least 300 years to 600 or 700 years. He could rely on the power of the heavenly path to become an emperor. But the other planes need to spend twice as much or even more time to reach this step. Qin Hao saw the situation of many planes through the memories of several reincarnations. The divine desolate's heavenly path was a perfect heavenly path. Cultivation here was faster, and the Tao was all-encompassing. In the world outside the divine desolate, the heavenly path was flawed. Living beings were born inferior, and their cultivation was extremely slow. But because the planes were different in size, the divine desolate was relatively small. The number of living beings in a large world outside was immeasurable. Therefore, the number of experts in the outer realms might be higher than in the divine desolate. Today, I finally know what it means to live in fortune without appreciating it. Holy Emperor Jiang chuckled. The divine desolate that they despised was an immeasurable treasure in the eyes of outsiders. There aren't many heavenly paths like the divine desolate. As far as I know, there are only 3 in the primordial desolate. Zhan Wu thought about the countless years that had passed. He had wandered from place to place, and he had witnessed many world-ending battles. A divine master could destroy all the living beings in an entire plane with a single thought. It was extremely tragic, and it was much more cruel than the Battle of Sunset Peak. There are 3 in the original realm. We are not the only one, Ocean Destroyer said in surprise. To be precise, there are only 2 left. The Divine Desolate, and Qin Hao looked at Zhan Wu. Mine Ao's hometown, the Archean realm. As for the 3rd, it had been completely destroyed by a realm war launched by a divine king. That's why you have to grow as quickly as possible. While the seal of the 14 origin spirit gods is still there, you have to do your best to prove your divinity. Otherwise, if the alien army attacks again, Qin Hao and I won't be able to protect this heavenly Tao. All of you will be enslaved or even completely wiped out. Zhan Wu's words were suffocating. He was not trying to scare Uncle Changji and the others, but a tragedy could happen at any time. In the 3rd original realm, because the native gods were too weak, they were unable to protect their heavenly path in the face of a tyrannical divine king. In the end, they had no choice but to perish with the heavenly path. The divine desolate might follow in the footsteps of others. I estimate that in less than 3,000 years, the seal of all living beings will dissipate. Now that I control the heavenly path and borrow the power of all living beings, I can maintain the seal for another 1,000 years. After 4,000 years, the aura of the divine desolate will once again drift to the outer realm. You do not have much time left. Qin Hao faced the crowd. This was also the reason why he had placed the imperial technique of the 7 peaks of the divine palace in the divine pavilion. If they did not become stronger as soon as possible and strive to create a few gods, after 4,000 years, this place might not exist anymore. Of course, Qin Hao had enough ability to take some people away, but for the living beings of the divine desolate, there was no chance of survival. Qin Hao, tell me, what realm are you at now? At this time, Shouwuk's sharp eyes focused on him. He did not believe in the so-called God. Controlling the heavenly path was at most another realm. Qin Hao and Zhan Wu were not people of the divine desolate, so they could leave. However, Shouwuk was a swordsman of the divine desolate, and he would absolutely not allow the tragedy of the destruction of the realm to happen. Heavenly Wheel Realm. Qin Hao replied seriously. Above the Emperor Realm was the Heavenly Wheel Realm. After saying this, a ball of extremely bright divine light burst out from Qin Hao's body. Suddenly, endless heavenly power descended, and the hall was suffocating for a moment. Everyone could clearly see that there was a wheel light flowing in Qin Hao's body, replacing all the meridians and dantian in his body. It began to operate with the wheel light. Look carefully. His heavenly wheel is a perfect heavenly wheel. The wheel light is flawless, while the heavenly wheels of the gods in the outer realm are not complete. If they encounter a perfect heavenly wheel, like Qin Hao, those of the same level will be killed immediately. Zhan Wu solemnly reminded everyone, even if 2 gods of the same level were to face a perfect heavenly wheel, an incomplete heavenly wheel would still be crushed like an emperor. This was the embodiment of the power of the original realm. Only the original realm's heavenly path could give birth to a perfect heavenly wheel. Whoosh! As the radiance of the heavenly wheel dissipated from Qin Hao's body, everyone in the hall gasped for breath. Their backs were drenched in sweat. Everyone deeply engraved the scene in their minds and firmly remembered it. Qin Hao's heavenly wheel was a perfect heavenly wheel. Chapter 1959. The heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness could directly create a perfect heavenly wheel expert. It was not impossible for other planes, but it required a lot of effort to perfect the heavenly wheel. For example, divine masters controlled the heavenly Tao of several planes and obtained the faith of thousands of different living beings. Only a few divine masters had perfect heavenly wheels. However, this period of torment was too long. Unlike the divine wilderness heavenly Tao, once one attained divinity here, they would have perfect heavenly wheels. It was basically impossible for ordinary gods in the outside world to achieve this, and divine masters could only perfect their heavenly wheels. Only divine kings' heavenly wheels were perfect. This was the reason for the outbreak of the ancient divine wars. The divine wilderness heavenly Tao could not only perfect the heavenly wheels, but also reproduce the divine king's original realm. How could the other divine masters not be tempted? Therefore, the 14 origin spirit gods risked their lives to protect the divine wilderness and prevent the original realm's heavenly Tao from being controlled by other divine masters. Divine King, what kind of realm is that? Sea Urchin trembled as he looked forward to it. Qin Hao waved his hand. Don't think too much. Divine kings are very far away from you. Attain divinity first. Sea Urchin, White Emperor, and the other primes were still trapped in true self and flawless. They had yet to attain nirvana. Nirvana was already difficult for the other thearchs. In order to attain nirvana, Qin Hao gave up his dharma body. In order to attain nirvana, the sunset battle god swallowed the old John Wu's Tao intent. In order to let Shou Wuk comprehend nirvana, Shadowless gave up her last chance of rebirth and planted her sword soul into his soul, fusing with Shou Wuk's Tao intent to complement each other. Nirvana was easier said than done. Each of the 4 realms of the Tao of Emperor was a prerequisite for attaining divinity. One had to pass nirvana and derive nomological laws to control the heavenly Tao. Furthermore, if one succeeded in nirvana and advanced to the 9 realms of laws, it would be enough to make Sea Urchin and the others suffer. How could becoming a god be so simple? Divine masters, divine kings. These were existences that even Qin Hao and John Wu envied and feared. Supreme God, now that we have comprehended the vastness of divine will, the heavenly Tao can't see it. What does it have to do with the divine Tao? The Judgment Hall Master, Sheng Yu, asked. You can understand the heavenly Tao as a kind of will. It carries the hopes of all living beings in a plane. If you want to become a god and wield the heavenly Tao, you must first obtain the recognition of the heavenly Tao. Qin Hao explained for Sheng Yu. What about the laws? Xiaohua asked. Thump. Qin Hao's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Xiaohua and said, Ask yourself. Qin Hao had been stumped by the question of laws and faith for a long time. It was only at that moment that he understood why Zhou Wudao didn't say it directly. It was because it would affect the attribute of his divine power and the recognition of the heavenly Tao. This matter had to be completely comprehended by the individual before the heavenly Tao could accept it. It's too difficult. How about this, Old White? Disperse your sovereign spirit and let you will fuse with me. Perhaps I can become a god this way. For the future of the continent, and to protect the power of our original realm, sacrifices are inevitable. Don't worry. After I become a god, I will erect a statue of you for the world to remember. Ocean Walker patted White Emperor's shoulder. Get lost, White Emperor said angrily. He shook his shoulder and pushed Ocean Walker away. He glared at Ocean Walker fiercely. Why didn't Ocean Walker disperse his sovereign spirit? If he helped him, he could also erect a statue of Ocean Walker. Nirvana isn't the only way. The nirvana of the Tao is also considered nirvana. Qin Hao said, Did you hear that? As long as you are willing to destroy your cultivation and comprehend the profound meaning of nirvana, you might also become a god. For the future of the continent, and to protect the power of our original realm, you might as well give it a try. White Emperor said to Ocean Walker. Get lost. Ocean Walker left White Emperor's side angrily and sat in another seat. Destroying one's sovereign spirit was easy to say. What if he couldn't comprehend it? The first-generation Grand Ancestor became a cripple. Becoming a god isn't done overnight. Everyone, don't go astray. I won't care when the time comes. Qin Hao smiled at everyone. With his ability, he could naturally use the heavenly Tao to forcefully help the emperors achieve nirvana. However, doing so would be beneficial and harmful. Remember what happened today in your hearts. Don't spread it around. Zhan Wu reminded them. We're God, don't worry. We understand. Everyone promised. The divine wilderness was the original realm. Although ordinary people wouldn't understand, if the news of the fall of the gods was made public, it would definitely cause panic and turmoil in the four regions. The scene would definitely be more violent than the birth of the evil calamity. Perhaps before the experts from other planes attacked, the divine wilderness would have already frightened countless creatures to death. The banquet continued. Qin hadn't have much time in the mortal world. He had promised not to interfere with the lower worlds. After this banquet, he would leave the East Continent and go to a place where no one could find him to cultivate. Although he had become a god and forged the heavenly wheel, he hadn't condensed the Lunli of the heavenly wheel. The strength of the Lunli was related to the level of combat strength and was extremely important. Seeing that the banquet was coming to an end, Shouwuk stood up and came to Qin Hao's side. He looked at him and said, Qin Hao, I have something to ask of you. I have thought about it for a long time. Can you revive Senior Zhuiying? Qin Hao didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave Shouwuk a few breaths of time before asking, Are you sure? He could revive Zhuiying, but he needed to extract Zhuiying's sword spirit from Wuk's divine soul. This would cause great harm to Shouwuk, and might even reverse his swordsmanship. No. Hyuning stood up from the banquet and looked at Shouwuk with a serious expression. Seeing that the other party was extremely insistent, he sighed and said, Wuk, my senior brother gave up his last chance to revive because he wanted to help you become the sword god. Just now, the supreme god and the war god said that the heavenly axiom will be in danger in the future. You should work harder to cultivate and protect the heavenly axiom in the divine wilderness. Don't let my senior brother's efforts go to waste. After Hyun-ing finished speaking, he left the hall alone. His back looked very sad. He also wanted to revive Zhuiying, but the sword spirit had already merged with Wuk's divine soul. That was Zhuiying the Great's wish. They should respect it. Did you hear that? Qin Hao patted Wuk's shoulder twice. You have already entered the Nirvana realm and are not far from deriving laws. If you extract that sword spirit now, how confident do you think you are in condensing a law? Not even 10%. Shouwuk said frankly. He was also very clear that once he lost Zhuiying's sword spirit, his control over sword intent would definitely not be as strong as it was now. Not to mention condensing a law, his realm might even regress. Go, don't let down Zhuiying and Hyuning. The divine wilderness needs its own sword god. Qin Hao said, Before I become a god, I will come and find you again. Shouwuk nodded and turned into a stream of swords, flying out of the hall and into the void. You can leave. Zhan Wu ordered them to leave. He also needed to quickly cultivate the unreal battle scripture. He felt that Qin Hao had the intention to leave the divine wilderness. He needed to raise his realm before that and accompany Dendi. We will take our leave. The emperor stood up and bowed, heading out of the hall. Supreme divinity, did you extend my life? The Tao ancestor stopped and secretly transmitted his voice. Not only does the divine wilderness need a sword body, but it also needs a Tao god. Qin Hao's consciousness descended into the Tao ancestor's mind. Aren't you violating the will of the heavenly Tao by doing this? The Tao ancestor was speechless. Qin Hao said that he would not interfere with the lower realm, but he did not say anything and took the power of the heavenly Tao to extend his life. My will is the heavenly Tao. Qin Hao chuckled. He did say that he would not interfere with the affairs of the lower realm, but that was for others. He naturally had to care about his own people. As long as he did not die, the Tao ancestor would have infinite life. He would have to pile up a Tao god. It was not for anything else but for Eastern Sky and Shermu. Eastern Sky, Shermu, you can be envious. The Tao ancestor sighed and turned into a ray of light, flying to the south. This was probably the reason why Eastern Sky and Sure Mu sent Qin Hao to the Tao Mountain. Back then, he protected Dendi. Today, the pill god reversed the heavenly Tao to extend his life and help him prove his divinity. This person is not simple. Doesn't his ability resemble that of a divine king from the Archean realm? Zhan Wu leaned closer to Qin Hao and whispered. Qin Hao thought hard for a moment before nodding his head. Indeed, it's very similar. Maybe we can create an existence as tyrannical as that. It was not empty talk. The divine wilderness was on the same level as the heavenly Tao of the Archean realm. War God, have we met before? Stunned, a voice floated over. Zhan Wu looked down and found that Sheng Yu of the Judgment Hall was standing at the entrance of the hall, looking over. Ridiculous. Who are you to be worthy of meeting me? Zhan Wu said bluntly. Although his words were unpleasant, he did not have any ill intentions. I was mistaken. Sheng Yu bowed and apologized, then stepped into the air and left. Was there really a mistake? Why did he feel a faint sense of familiarity from Zhan Wu, as if they had really met before? Chapter 1960. Why didn't you tell Sheng Yu the truth? Qin Hao asked with a smile. I really don't know him well. Zhan Wu answered honestly. In order to investigate Lei Ju, he had been the Lord of Thunder Plains for a while and taught Lei Jiao. During that time, he only preached through Emperor's will and did not appear in public. Lei Jiao was talented and stood out from many disciples. His thunder doctrine was rare, and the elders recommended him to be the Lord's personal disciple. At that time, Lei Ju was not in the orthodoxy. Zhan Wu took the opportunity to hide behind the scenes and pretend to be the Lord's Taoist body. He secretly found out some secrets. He suspected that Lei Ju was one of the 12 villains. Lei Jiao was taught by him, but in Sheng Yu's impression, he was the Lord of Thunder Plains and had nothing to do with Zhan Wu. As he expected, Lei Ju was one of the 12 villains. Unfortunately, although he was dead, the Sunset Battle Immortal still did not know who he was. Perhaps only Qin Hao knew this secret. After the banquet, Qin Hao and the Sunset Battle Immortal left the East Continent and no longer cared about the mortal world. The Western Liang army entered Daqin, and the empire was ruled by the Qin people. Qin Yu was the crown prince, and Haidafu was the prime minister. In addition to supervising the divine pavilion, Tiando also became the protector divine general of the Qin people. With Tiando guarding here, Qin Hao was very relieved. After all, this guy was able to compete with Wuk, and his strength was extraordinary. In Western Liang, after the Qin people left, the empire was changed to Western Qi. Xiaoguo was enthroned as the emperor by God's will and cooperated with Luo Shui. In the southern region and northern borderline, there were not many changes. Because of the migration of the Si tribe and the Piku tribe, at first there was some panic and turmoil. However, the local people had always been tough. As time passed, the people gradually adapted and accepted the two ancient tribes. There were also some changes in the 5 realms of the East Continent. Zhou Wudao brought his entire clan to the God-burying island, abandoning their homeland and using the demon domain as a foundation to establish the demon god empire. From then on, the power of the demon Dao would be passed down for generations. Zhou Wudao through the territory of the great Zhou Empire to Mo Xian without any reluctance. This was also expected. The great Zhou dynasty was between the Qin state and Mo Luo. Although Han Lingxian had died, this feeling was still unbearable. It was not as good as the Mo domain, where the emperor was far away. They could do whatever they wanted. The qi of the Mo domain was also suitable for cultivating the power of the Mo Dao. Proud godly Zhu had regrown the hands he had lost in the battle. Now that the 4 regions were operating under the control of the elixir god, the Golden Age was even more prosperous. The Divine Pavilion had become the most powerful martial house in the continent. It contained tens of thousands of emperor's techniques and attracted countless handsome people. The sovereigns of the 5 realms predicted that in 1,000 years, the way of the emperor would evolve to the peak of the Yuanling era, and there would be more than 1 million of them. This brought great pressure to the sovereigns, and it also urged them to do their best to become gods. Only by becoming gods would they not be drowned by the way of the emperor and lose their position as sovereigns. In the boundless void, a majestic temple filled with divine light floated quietly. It was like a majestic residence, slowly orbiting the four regions, silently watching the people of the lower worlds. The temple was very far from the divine wilderness plain. Even ordinary, unblemished cultivators could not reach it. Only people like the Phoenix Grandmaster and the true Extreme Sword Master had the ability to cross the boundless void and come here. This temple was naturally Qin Hao's divine residence. He, Xiao Han, Wei Wei, the sunset battle god, Lu, Zhuge Xiu, and Zhang Lang lived in this temple. In the past 100 years, they had not asked about the affairs of the lower worlds. However, the major events in the four regions of the divine wilderness were all under Qin Hao's perception. In the past 100 years, the four regions had been peaceful. Although there had been friction between the various forces, most of them had stopped. On the other hand, the Battle Kingdom of the West and the White Moon Pavilion of the Central State had triggered a great war that shook the four regions. It had also involved the other overlord forces. The Battle Kingdom, with Prince Chun as the commander, had sent troops to the Central State and fought fiercely with Emperor Bai. In the heat of the battle, both sides had even used the divine seal of the Divine Pavilion, using the divine seal's divine power to engage in a fierce battle of false laws. This battle had alarmed Qin Hao. The battle tower had personally come to the scene to suppress both sides and resolve the battle. It was only later that they found out that Emperor Bai's divine pavilion had snatched an extremely outstanding talent from the Battle Kingdom's divine pavilion, causing the battle to erupt. When Qin Hao heard this, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. He did not send down a divine decree to blame either side. In the end, he had transferred that person to Tiando of the Qin Imperial City, causing Emperor Bai and Jin Shen's efforts to be in vain. In martial arts, it was not enough to just cultivate survival of the fittest. Occasionally, there would be an imperial battle, which was beneficial to the development of martial arts. The strong would live, and the weak would die. This was the tacit rule of the heavenly way since ancient times. After this incident, Emperor Bai, who had just entered the unblemished realm, immediately went into seclusion to try to break through to the Nirvana realm. He swore that he would not defeat Jin Shun and would never be a sovereign again. He also took the initiative to give up the control of the Divine Pavilion's divine seal. Jin Shun did the same, and his ruthless words were even more ruthless. Regardless of whether he had reached the Nirvana realm or not, they would fight in 300 years. At that time, whoever lost would have to kneel down and be a grandson. When the letter of challenge reached the ears of the other sovereigns, Feng Lan and Tu Hai burst out laughing in front of their disciples. They did not have the bearing of a sovereign at all. At this moment, divine light enveloped the divine hall, and a majestic heavenly way aura surged from within. Qin Hao was meditating and cultivating. On his body, terrifying flames were burning. It was as if he had become the fire source of the entire plane just by sitting there. The power of the flames permeated the lower worlds, nurturing endless fire creatures, wielding the heavenly way, forging the heavenly wheel. The meridians and dantian of the heavenly wheel realm were replaced by the light of the great path. The heavenly wheel was divided into 4 types: mortal grade, divine grade, celestial grade, and perfect grade. The higher the grade of the heavenly wheel, the stronger the power of the heavenly way it contained, and the stronger the divine power it could release. But at this level, it was not enough to forge a heavenly wheel. The heavenly wheel had to be filled with attributes to continue to increase its combat power. It was like filling empty blood vessels with blood. Only when the blood surged and exploded would the power be strong enough. At this moment, Qin Hao was about to condense the flame Lunli. Flame was the foundation of the survival of the Alchemy Lord clan in the ancient world. Only when their flame was strong enough could they refine the ideal elixir. The heavenly way of the divine wilderness retained the power of the original realm. It was a complete heavenly way. The red lotus flame that was nurtured was very domineering. In the untainted realms, the Red Lotus flame could be called the best of the best, unless it encountered the flame of the Dragon King. Otherwise, there's almost no strange flame that could compete with it. In the past, I thought that the flame of the Dragon King was just a name. Now it seems that it really exists. Yin Ming is a cultivator who combined the human and dragon races. He dabbled in alchemy and refined the Great Void Cauldron. The flame of the Dragon King must be on him. Yin Ming did not refine the Red Lotus. It was not that the Red Lotus was not strong. Obviously, there was a better choice. Qin Hao analyzed the dragon power contained in the blood essence that Yin Long's dragon bloodline should belong to the fire dragon race. It was impossible for the fire dragon race leader to say that Yin Ming had nothing to do with the creation of such a powerful being. In the divine wilderness, Yin Ming was like Qin Hao. His heavenly wheel was also at the perfect level. Together with his powerful dragon power and the flame of the Dragon King that was nurtured by the perfect heavenly way, it was no wonder that the heavenly wheel cultivators from other planes could not take down the divine wilderness. In a one-on-one battle, almost no one in the heavenly wheel realm was Yin Ming's opponent, unless the cultivators from the ancient world came. Not to mention others. Even Qin Hao did not have much confidence in facing Yin Ming. Then, the other half of Yin Ming's human bloodline should belong to some ancient alchemy clan on the continent. Qin Hao did not dare to say that in terms of fighting, but in terms of alchemy, he definitely had a higher chance of winning. The venerable alchemy clan still had this much confidence. Wisps of red flames continued to spread across the heavenly wheel. It was as if hot blood had been poured into his veins and gradually covered his entire body. Counting from the day of the divine wilderness, Qin Hao had spent 100 years to condense the flame Lunli. Until today, finally, the flame Lunli completely merged with the heavenly wheel and reached every part of his divine body. Boom! The area where the temple was located seemed to have an invisible vibration. Suddenly, the sky emitted endless heavenly wave flames. Every particle floating in the air seemed to contain the power of fire that could burn all things. Looking at the sky from the lower world, under the night sky, the temple was like a burning star. It was spectacular. At the same time, the fire elemental cultivators of the 4 domains clearly felt this power. They were shocked to find that the power of fire in the spiritual qi was stronger than before. To fire elemental cultivators like them, it was extremely beneficial. At this time, the one who felt it the most was the sun god of the southern domain. He suddenly woke up from his sleep. Wearing a sleeping robe, he pushed open the window of his palace and stared blankly at the burning star in the sky. He said in his sleep, "Fire god." After becoming the pill god, the power of the heavenly way flames suddenly increased. Almost every fire elemental cultivator's consciousness felt the arrival of the fire god's will. Congratulations! Zhan Wu took a step forward and looked at Qin Hao, who was covered in tumbling blood flames. He saw that in Qin Hao's heavenly wheel, there was a tiny line of fire that circled around his body. It circulated along with the heavenly wheel's radiance, resonating with the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness. Qin Hao had cultivated the divine power of fire. There's nothing to congratulate. I want to go out and take a look. Even if I have to stand very far away, I want to see the position of the primeval realm. Qin Hao slowly opened his eyes. 2 flames flashed in his golden eyes. Okay, Zhan Wu said casually. You know what I mean. I want to leave the divine wilderness and go to other planes. Qin Hao said solemnly. Zhan Wu fell silent. After a short while, he said, In 200 years, I will be able to achieve perfection in the law of battle intent and prove my divinity again. At that time, let's go together. I'm not a child. Qin Hao smiled unhappily. He just wanted to go out and take a look. He didn't want to fight with the heavenly wheel realm cultivators of other planes. I've worked hard for a long time to bring you back to where you are today. Zhan Wu lowered his head and said. He didn't doubt Qin Hao's strength. Under normal circumstances, no heavenly wheel realm cultivator could hurt Qin Hao unless he encountered a divine master expert, let alone keep him. However, It would be a lie to say that he wasn't worried. I won't be far from the divine wilderness. I'll be waiting for you in the Dongwang realm, Qin Hao said. When he said this, the flames in his eyes flashed with a sharp luster, containing a strong, killing intent. Zhan Wu's body trembled slightly. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but changed his original meaning. He nodded and said, "Okay, before I arrive, don't fight with him. I have to kill him with my own hands." Zhan Wu clenched his fists, making a terrible creaking sound. The master of the Dongwang realm, the Dongwang realm. He knew that Qin Hao wanted to avenge him. However, this hatred needed to be avenged by the sunset battle god himself. Chapter 1961. Zhan Wu suffered a lot in order to stabilize Qin Hao's soul that was on the verge of collapse and find a suitable body for rebirth. Dongwang, the master of the primordial realm, Dongwang, had an extremely unpleasant incident with Zhan Wu. Because of this, the sunset battle god was greatly humiliated. The pride in the bones of the tribes of the primordial realm was stronger than that of other heavenly wheel experts. This was the innate nature of their race. Dongwang, as a god of the lower realm, had trampled on the dignity of the young master of the primordial realm battle god tribe. In the past, Zhan Wu had countless ways to make Dongwang regret. In short, this grudge had to be avenged. Even if Zhan Wu forgot, Qin Hao would not allow it. Dende had to take revenge, especially after awakening the celestial source and recovering the fragmented memories of his first life. He believed that Dongwang's actions could not be forgiven easily. Dongwang has perfected his heavenly wheel and is a divine master. Not to mention now, even if we were at our strongest, we might not be able to defeat him even if we work together. Don't be stupid and impulsive. Zhan Wu warned heavily. Don't worry, I won't, Qin Hao said with a smile. If a worker wanted to do a good job, he had to sharpen his tools first. He controlled the heavenly Tao and had just condensed his Lunli. Naturally, he could not directly clash with a divine master. He would wait for the right time. Zhan Wu nodded. Are you bringing anyone else on this trip? Honor will come with me. Also, I want to bring Sword Master True Extreme out to train, Qin Hao said. As for the others, there was no need. Xiaohan has the bloodline of the god race. You want to investigate her background? Zhan Wu looked at Qin Hao. Xiaohan's mother was not from the divine wilderness. The sunset battle god could naturally feel it. This is probably her father's wish. Qin Hao sighed. Uncle Xiao must have been looking forward to this day for a long time. That's good. If possible, we should try to maintain this relationship. If Xiaohan's mother is willing to help, it will be beneficial for us to return to the primordial realm in the future. Zhan Wu and Qin Hao indeed needed the strength of the other god race. As for bringing Sword Master True Extreme out of the divine wilderness, he was a rare talent. His way of the sword was pure and flawless. Now that he had entered the Nirvana realm he had started condensing the laws of the sword way of the sword. It was only Nirvana level to become a god, proving to the divine. Heaven is SS true, and even the divine of the Tao's levels. Of God, perfect level 2s to its perfects, Lunlies of the S's, to its heavenly heavens, S of the God. I'm going to the northern frontier, Qin Hao said. There was no time to lose. Since he had made the decision, he had to act as soon as possible. Suddenly, his body was filled with divine light. Countless fire particles flew and disappeared in front of Zhan Wu. His aura descended upon Liaodu in the northern border. Xiaohan was with him. Martial Emperor Palace. The divine light of the heavenly path fell. The continent's supreme god, Qin Hao, arrived with Princess Jinghua. The guards and maids in the palace all knelt down in fear. Why didn't you greet me? I was just talking to Sister Wei Wei. Xiaohan followed Qin Hao to Xiao Yi's residence. Along the way, both sides of the road were filled with kneeling figures. Just now, she had been swept away by Qin Hao. Xiaohan didn't even have time to react. It was too sudden. Qin Hao was being very impolite. My matter is more important. Qin Hao smiled. As they chatted, the two arrived at Xiao Yi's residence. At this moment, Xiao Yi Qin Hao's parents, and the warlord Duan Zhanfei were all in the palace. When they saw the divine light descending from the sky, they immediately stood up to welcome it. "Greetings, Supreme God." Everyone bowed respectfully. Qin Hao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He immediately cupped his hands and bowed. "Father-in-law, father, mother, warlord, we don't have to be so polite. That won't do. You are a god. Sitting on this position, you are the father of all life." Xiao Yi's face was solemn. He had to show the necessary etiquette. If the other overlords saw this, they would say that they didn't respect the gods. "Son, you don't have to feel that it's troublesome. This is a separate matter. Isn't it good?" Tang Rong said. "All right, as long as you are happy." Qin Hao was helpless. "Let's enter the palace. Why did you suddenly come here today? At least send a strand of divine intent to inform us, so that I can arrange for the servants to prepare." Xiao Yi waved at Gongsun Changxing and hurriedly gave him a few instructions. Gongsun Changxing trembled as he jogged away. Soon, a large number of palace maids followed behind Gongsun Changxing as they carried bejeweled nectar and delicious delicacies into the palace and placed them on the banquet table. "Father-in-law, I would like to leave the divine wilderness for a period of time." Qin Hao didn't have any food. He looked at Xiao Wudi. "What did you say? Leave the divine wilderness?" Tang Rong shouted and stood up in shock. Qin Dingtian pulled Tang Rong back and said, "Why are you shouting so loudly? Don't let the overlords of the four regions hear you." If the overlord of the heavenly Tao left the continent, and people with ulterior motives found out, they would take the opportunity to cause trouble. "Mother, don't be nervous. Awu will temporarily take care of the four regions for me. Even if I leave, there shouldn't be any idiots who will try to anger the sunset battle god." Qin Hao's expression was relaxed. Zhan Wu didn't have a good personality like him. That He Zi would kill if he didn't agree with him. Furthermore, Zhan Wu was about to become a god again. The divine wilderness would also give birth to a god who could control war. "Why are you leaving?" Xiao Yi asked. "I'm going to train in other planes. My cultivation has reached a bottleneck. It will be difficult for me to make any progress if I stay in the divine wilderness." Also, Qin Hao looked at Xiao Han. About the crown princess, Xiao Yi's heart tightened as if something was strangling it. Then, he sighed and said, "There's no harm in speaking frankly. We're all on the same side." Duan Zhanfei was his subordinate and close friend. Gongsun Changxing watched him and Xiao Han grow up together and was an old servant of the Xiao clan. Qin Hao and Tang Rong were Qin Dingtian's parents. There were no secrets between them that couldn't be said openly. Since that's the case, I'll be frank. Mother-in-law isn't from the divine wilderness. When I go out to train, I'll investigate her whereabouts. I believe this is also a knot in your heart and a long-cherished wish, right? Qin Hao looked at Xiao Yi with a sincere gaze. The husband and wife had been separated for several hundred years. If they were ordinary people, they would have turned into bones long ago. Even if an emperor had a lifespan of 1,000 years, he would still have worries in his heart. How could he let it go? Furthermore, Xiao Yi was a man with a strong temperament. He wasn't as cold as the other emperors who didn't care about family ties. Qin Hao. Xiao Yi's eyes were red. He stood up from his seat and gradually bent his knees. He trembled as he knelt towards Qin Hao. In an instant, everyone in the hall was shocked. "Father, you don't have to do this." Xiao Han left his seat and walked forward to help Xiao Yi up. Xiao Yi waved his hand at Xiao Han. Seeing Qin Hao's awkward expression, he considered his son-in-law's situation and didn't really kneel down. He sat back down and said tearfully, "That's right. This place is indeed my concern and also my long-cherished wish. Han, Er's birth mother isn't from the divine wilderness, but from another plane of existence. If you can find her whereabouts and bring her back so that our family can reunite, even if I, Xiao Yi, die immediately, I will have no regrets." Large drops of tears fell from his face. Emperors were battered by hundreds of battles, but they didn't shed tears. At this moment, Xiao Yi found it difficult to control his emotions. It wasn't that he didn't shed tears easily, but that he hadn't been hurt to the core. There was nothing more moving than a tough man with tears flowing down his face. Xiao Yi had looked forward to this for hundreds of years. He had once thought that there was no hope in this life. He had held the Northern Frontier Imperial Martial Competition to test whether Qin Hao was sincere towards Xiao Han or not. Secondly, he had the intention of choosing the continent's strongest genius as his son-in-law. If he wasn't so powerless, how could he, a dignified emperor, entrust his hopes to someone else? Now, Qin Hao hadn't let Xiao Han down, nor had he disappointed Xiao Yi. He had truly proven the heavenly Tao and become a god. He had even said that he would leave the divine wilderness to find his wife's whereabouts. This made Xiao Yi feel that the greatest happiness in his life was meeting Xiao Han's mother. His greatest fortune was recognizing Qin Hao as his son-in-law. Father-in-law, you don't need to be sad. If possible, I will do my best to bring mother-in-law back. However, there are some things that I still need to ask you. You don't need to ask my father, because I know far more than him and in much more detail. Xiao Han's eyes were red. If she had known that Qin Hao had come to the northern frontier for this, she would have told him everything that Qin Hao wanted to know. Then, she wouldn't have had to watch her father suffer. Qin Hao was stunned. You undid the divine Tao seal on Moonfall? Xiao Yi looked at his daughter in shock. It's been solved long ago. Xiao Han smiled sadly. In reality, it was fortunate that her mother's inheritance had protected her throughout this journey. It had resolved many dangers for her and Qin Hao many times, and she had also learned many things from it. Xiao Han knew more about the crown prince consort's surname, family, and innate talent than Xiao Yi. It was my negligence. Qin Hao looked at Xiao Han apologetically. He was afraid that if he suddenly said it, it would make Xiao Han sad. Therefore, in that case, let Honor accompany you. Since you left behind the celestial race's sacred artifact, she must have told Xiao Han all the secrets. Xiao Yi slowly closed his eyes. In an instant, he seemed to age a lot, as though he had been freed from a shackle. Now, all he wanted was for his wife to return to his side. Other than that, there was nothing else he wanted. Son, when will you be back? Tang Rong walked to Qin Hao's side and seriously looked at Qin Hao's face. It was as though she wanted to remember every detail of his facial features. She was afraid that Qin Hao would never return. Although her cultivation level was limited, she knew what leaving the divine wilderness meant. It was going to another world. Mother, don't worry. I'm a god. With the power of the heavenly Tao, I can return to the divine wilderness with a thought. There won't be any danger. Qin Hao said with a gentle smile. It doesn't matter when you return. In short, remember, don't try to be brave in front of the heavenly Tao. Qin Ding Tian stood up and said. Qin Ding Tian stood up and warned. He was not a god, but he understood the principle of people having no choice but to lower their heads under the eaves of others. In the territories of other gods, Qin Hao would definitely have some restrictions. I will remember. Qin Hao nodded. You can go. Xiao Yi waved his hand. We old men can't help. Now we have to rely on our son-in-law and daughter for everything. Qin Hao, don't tell me you and Xiao Han. Father, don't be so pessimistic. I will bring mother back. Xiao Han said. Xiao Yi closed his eyes and no longer spoke. The only thing he could do was pray. Or perhaps he wouldn't be able to wait for his wife. Even his daughter and son-in-law might not return. Xiao Han, let's go. Qin Hao felt that the atmosphere was somewhat heavy. He could understand the intense worry in Emperor Zhao's heart. After all, the Heavenly Wheel realm was different because of the Heavenly Tao. The variables were far greater than the other realms. Divine light filled the air. Qin Hao and Xiao Han left without eating a single delicacy. Because Kuang Tang's innate spiritual sense was incomplete, it was hard for him to control his emotions. Qin Hao had promised to solve this matter, so he should take responsibility and let Kuang Tang follow him. I've already prepared all the materials needed to refine Senior Sister's body. If she's willing, she can be reborn at any time. It's naturally great that we've encountered even stronger innate spiritual materials during this trip. Tang's situation is more complicated. Don't worry, Nothing will happen if she stays by my side. Qin Hao's promise made the Phoenix clan ancestor feel at ease. Go, but remember not to be impulsive. We'll talk about everything after we meet up. Zhan Wu said. Qin Hao nodded. I'll leave the 4 regions to you. Lu, Zhuge Qing, and Zhang Lang began to break through to the Nirvana Emperor's path. He believed that before long, when the Sunset Battle God proved himself, a few more false gods would appear on the continent. After everything was arranged, Qin Hao's divine will swept out. Suddenly, the primordial spirit seal that sealed the path world shook violently. Soon, a halo appeared, like a black hole that appeared in the seal. It expanded rapidly, revealing a plain passage. Everyone looked carefully and could faintly see turbulent winds raging outside the passage. The terrifying power seemed to be able to crush everything. Hey, don't you have any other plans to tell me? Tiando saw that Qin Hao was about to take everyone away and could not help but ask. His eyes flickered. He was rather envious of Shou Wuck and even a little jealous. Do your job well in the lower realm. Qin Hao turned his head and smiled strangely at Tiando. With a wave of his sleeve, a bright divine light enveloped everyone. They turned into a whole body and hid in the passage. Then, the light gradually dimmed until it was completely swallowed by the darkness outside the elemental wilderness. Buzz! At this time, the primordial spirit seal's brilliance surged. The black hole slowly closed and disappeared. Do your job well in the lower realm. I'm just a coolie. Tiando imitated Qin Hao and muttered angrily. Then, he turned into a ray of emperor light and swept toward the east continent lower realm. In the elemental wilderness, countless shining lights decorated the galaxy. It was vast and magnificent. If one's telekinesis was strong enough, one would be able to sense from afar and see the outlines of countless continents from the lights. At this time, the supreme god of the divine wilderness, Qin Hao, led everyone across the elemental wilderness and moved forward. It's so beautiful. Xiaohan looked at everything around her in amazement. Hiding under the protection of Qin Hao's divine power, she was in a vast and endless galaxy. It turned out that the stars she saw in the divine wilderness were all real. Terrifying. Wuck's feelings were completely different from Xiaohan's. Being in the elemental wilderness turbulence and seeing the myriad of worlds, the scenery was naturally wonderful. However, he could feel that the stars were formed by countless continents. Like the divine wilderness, they had all kinds of living beings. They flowed with majestic spirit chi, which was why they glowed. The stronger the living beings were, the denser the spirit chi in the plane, and the more dazzling the light emitted. Therefore, he could roughly analyze which planes were stronger and which had weaker living beings. When Shou Wuck turned around and looked at the divine wilderness, he was stunned. In his field of vision, it was pitch black. He tried his best to focus his vision, and only then did he faintly see a dot of light flashing in the black tide. It was very weak. If he did not look carefully, he would not have noticed it. Do you know the difference between the divine wilderness and the other planes? Qin Hao's voice sounded from beside him. When his voice faded, the tiny light in Wuck's field of vision completely disappeared, fusing with the darkness. What he saw just now was the most realistic portrayal. Compared to the other planes, the spirit chi radiance emitted by the living beings in the divine wilderness was like a candle's light compared to the sun and moon. It was also like a firefly entering a furnace. The difference was like heaven and earth. Furthermore, there was no light in the vicinity of the divine wilderness. In the endless darkness, the divine wilderness was the only tiny light, as if it had been forgotten and abandoned by the myriad of worlds. There will come a day when we can make it the brightest star in the elemental wilderness, more dazzling than that position. Shou Wuck seemed to be encouraging himself as he pointed in a certain direction. Qin Hao looked over. In the direction head Wu Kei was pointing at, there was an extremely ferocious radiance. The intensity of the radiance was too dazzling. It was like a great sun hanging in the sky, covering an endless area. The starlight there was completely engulfed by the radiance of the great sun. Qin Hao's body trembled uncontrollably. He quietly clenched his fist and replied, "Yes." The majestic sun that covered an endless area of the elemental wilderness was the peak of the myriad of worlds, the primeval world. He and John Woo drifted out from there, drifting about, and finally fell into the last remaining weak light in the endless darkness behind them. "Where are we going now?" Tang Tang asked. "Go over there." Qin Hao's finger pointed straight ahead, Dongwang World. Dongwang World was formed by several stars. Every star was guarded by at least one god. Among them, the brightest star in the center was the main realm of Dongwang World, the heavenly Tao that was personally controlled by the god of the East. Dongwang World, Xiao Han muttered to himself as he looked forward. Dongwang World was closest to the divine wilderness, but the brilliance of the few stars added together was not too eye-catching among the myriad of worlds. Dongwang World is a realm that specializes in the power of space. The world master is called the God of the East, and he is extremely powerful. Qin Hao explained. The power of space had always been one of the most powerful among the myriad of worlds. If it was not limited by natural resources, Dongwang World's power might be even stronger. The power of space should also exist in the way of the sword. Shouwuk said. In the past, he had heard Qin Hao and Zhan Wu's introduction. Other than the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness and the primeval heavenly Tao, the other realms were lacking in the way of the heavenly Tao, and the cultivators only specialized in one type of power. Therefore, all the living beings in Dongwang World must have cultivated the power of space, and the way of the sword also included space sword techniques. But the sword cultivators in Dongwang World are not strong. This time, we will pass by there and settle some small matters first. Then, I will bring you to a true great world of Sword Tao. That great world of Sword Tao is the best place for you to prove your divinity as the true extreme sword god. Qin Hao said with a smile. That makes me yearn for it. Shouwuk's eyes lit up. A great world of Sword Tao that could be praised by Qin Hao is definitely one of the top existences in the elemental wilderness. Presumably, the living beings in this world were all extraordinary sword cultivators. Didn't Brother Wu tell you to behave and not cause any trouble? Xiao Han looked at Qin Hao, passing by to settle some small matters. She had never heard of any small matters from Qin Hao. Moreover, he was always thinking about it. She was afraid that this small matter was not simple. I am passing by to visit an old friend. Don't worry, I am not familiar with the God of the East, so I will not find trouble with him. Zhan Wu is very familiar with him, but unfortunately, Al Wu did not come. You will know when the time comes. Next, we will go to the Phantom Continent under Dongwang World to return the favor of an old friend. As Qin Hao spoke, his divine energy wrapped around everyone and flew like a ray of light, falling toward a certain star in Dongwang World. Ah Wu and Dongwang World did have enmity, but in Dongwang World, senior illusion sovereign of the Phantom Continent had once taken care of Qin Hao. After 10,000 years, now that Dindi had regained his godhood and forged the heaven's wheel, they would naturally pay him a visit. Phantom City. Dongwang World was the main city of the Phantom Continent. There were countless cultivators and experts. Illusion Sovereign, as a god under the God of the East, was in charge of the Phantom Plane. Apart from his strong cultivation, his moral character was respected by the local cultivators. He had the same status as Qin Hao in the divine wilderness, an indisputable god of the heavenly Tao. However, he did not consider himself a god. Instead, he established his own sect and took in many disciples, grooming many outstanding people for the Phantom Continent. It was said that there were even geniuses who ascended from Illusion Sovereign's deity Jin to other planes. Illusion Sovereign's influence in the Phantom Continent was extremely high. In the past, when Zhan Wu became a mercenary to help the god of the East conquer the Yuan spirit plane, he stayed under Illusion Sovereign's tutelage. When Illusion Sovereign saw that Qin Hao's soul was damaged, he consumed his divine energy to take out divine materials to stabilize Qin Hao's soul. Back then, Qin Hao did not have the ability to repay this favor. Now, that Qin Hao had become a god and became the master of a plane, he naturally had to do his part to see if Senior Illusion Sovereign needed any help. At least, Qin Hao could use the energy of the divine wilderness to perfect the heaven's wheel for Illusion Sovereign. Although he could not make Illusion Sovereign's heaven's will perfect, it was still a good thing to perfect it. Chapter 1963. Withdrawing his divine power, Qin Hao and the others descended upon the Phantom Continent and stood in the heavenly path. At that moment, the five of them felt an extremely majestic will of the great path of space flooding over. It surged forcefully into their spiritual souls and merged with their wills. Xiaohan, Wuk, and Crazy Tang trembled slightly under the suppression of this space Tao will. It's normal to feel uncomfortable under the heavenly Tao after leaving the divine wilderness. You will get used to it slowly. Qin Hao explained via voice transmission. Even he would be affected. However, the divine wilderness, heavenly Tao, belonged to the original realm. It was a perfect heavenly Tao that encompassed everything. Although the other planes had different Tao wills, the divine wilderness could nurture all of them. Wuk, Xiaohan, and Crazy Tang had naturally come into contact with the divine wilderness space Tao will. They would get used to the discomfort they felt now. Moreover, they had the innate ability to accept and be accepted by the phantom heavenly Tao. This was the strength of the original realm. They were able to adapt to the chaos. On the other hand, experts from other planes who came to the Phantom Continent did not have this innate ability. Moreover, the suppression of the heavenly Tao would be even stronger. 10,000 years ago, Qin Hao had passed by here. Although he had some memories, he was not familiar with it. However, as the master of the heavenly Tao, Illusion Sovereign's residence was not difficult to find. Soon, the group arrived at Illusion Sovereign's place. This was a huge palace. It gave people a feeling of grandeur from afar. "We are here to visit Illusion Sovereign. Please inform him." In front of the palace gate, Qin Hao spoke to the guards guarding the gate. "He is very busy and will not meet outsiders. You can leave." One of the guards glanced at Qin Hao and waved his hand lazily, as if he was dismissing him. "I am an old friend of Senior Illusion Sovereign. Lord Divine Guard, please inform him." Qin Hao frowned. Since when did the guards at the arched door become so undisciplined? Moreover, they did not seem to have any respect for Illusion Sovereign. "Don't you understand human language? I said he is not free. Scram back to where you came from. Don't disturb my mood." A burly man glared at the cultivators with his ferocious eyes, trying to scare them away. "What did you say?" Crazy Tang roared as he angrily glared ahead. For better or worse, Qin Hao was the divine desolate's heavenly Tao god. Even if he was in someone else's territory, how could a few small fries dare to shout at God? "Oh, this guy's temper isn't small. Why is he trying to scare us?" One of them looked at Quang Tang with interest, as if he hadn't seen such a situation in a long time. "I wonder whose subordinates they are. If you don't scram, I'll throw you out." The burly guard suddenly took a step forward. As soon as he spoke, an unblemished emperor's might descended and pressed down on Feng Tang. "Dong!" Showuk stepped forward. Sword aura bloomed all over his body, and a wisp of sword was shot out. Suddenly, clear crackling sounds were heard in the space, as well as the sound of something shattering. Following that burly guard took several steps back. His expression became ugly as he said, "Nirvana experts, you aren't people for the Mirage plane." Clearly, Wuk's sword will allow the other party to sense his realm. Furthermore, there were very few Mirage sword cultivators, and Nirvana realm sword cultivators like Sho Wuk did not exist. "We have no intention of offending you. We are just here to visit Senior Illusion Sovereign. I hope that everyone can make things convenient," Qin Hao said in a low voice. He could faintly feel that something was amiss. These guards had just called Illusion Sovereign and did not address him respectfully. Clearly, they were not people under the heavenly Tao god. "We won't see him," a person coldly said. With a hua-la sound, 6 figures lined up in front of the palace gate, blocking the path. At that moment, this space became incomparably oppressive. Many cultivators nearby were attracted over, and more of them were coming over. They were pointing at the two parties who were at daggers drawn. Faintly, there were voices of fear like Goddong Bo and Audacious. Since you insist on blocking the path, don't blame me for being impolite. Showuk's voice reverberated through the palace gate. Seeing this, the 6 guards roared out at the same time. They let out lumps of emperor light, and a huge golden bell fell from the void, trying to suppress and swallow Showuk. Wong, a powerful sword intent, suddenly rumbled out from Showuk's body. His face was tense as he continued to move forward. The Nirvana sword intent, mixed with the light particles, transformed into a golden sword light. With a boom, it collided with the large bell that was pressing down. In an instant, the large bell shattered and exploded. The 6 people in front of Showuk let out a muffled groan. Their bodies swayed as they retreated a few steps. The sword intent of this sword cultivator was really too strong. Wuk similarly stopped in his tracks. A strand of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He had single-handedly destroyed the Tao intent of 6 flawless experts. Especially when he was suppressed by the heavenly Tao of Mirage, he could not avoid being injured. But it was only a single step. In the next moment, he continued forward with a taut face. He coldly spat out trash. 6 flawless experts with the support of the heavenly Tao energy could not stop an outsider Nirvana expert. In the divine wilderness, this was a disgrace to the flawless realm. If the ones blocking the palace gate were Zhang Lang's group of 4, Zhang Lu, and Zhu Guqing, Showuk would definitely not be able to take half a step forward. It could be seen that the people from the Mirage Plain were unreasonably weak. You, the muscular guard, covered his chest and angrily said. Facing Showuk, who was getting closer, he could not help but take a few steps back. As the divine guards of the Paragon god Dongbo, they had naturally seen sword cultivators from other planes. But the one in front of them had an exceptionally strong sword intent. They had to admit that they were not his opponent. Stop! At that moment, a dignified voice boomed out from within the palace gate. It broke the stalemate and resolved the unsightly situation of the Paragon god Dongbo's guards. This voice was mixed with a heavenly might. It was like the will of the heavens had descended, forcing others to obey. The people under Dongbo are looking down on the old man more and more. Since you're my old friend, you should let him in. Or do you want to force the old man to personally come out and welcome you? Illusion Reverend's dignified voice pressed down. After hearing this, the expressions of the Paragon god Dongbo's guards changed. The human wall took the initiative to disperse. Come in, Illusion Reverend transmitted. Qin Hao went forward and patted Wuk's shoulder, indicating that he should not be angry. He took the lead and entered the palace gate. Xiao Han, Tang, and the others followed. If you are not convinced, you can come and find me anytime. When Showuk passed by the 6 people, he saw them glaring at him fiercely. He could not help but coldly say this. Too arrogant. I've never been treated like this before. Where did this group of people come from? They shouldn't be deities from the Sword Tao Great World, right? The 6 guards felt Showuk's provocation. They were both angry and afraid. They thought of a certain Sword Tao Great World. From Showuk's performance, only that place could produce such a tyrannical sword cultivator. Furthermore, Showuk's status was not low. The few guards exchanged glances. Soon, they left the palace gate and went to a huge mansion in the city. The deities from a Sword Tao Great World came to the Mirage continent and took the initiative to meet Illusion Reverend. This was not a good sign for the Paragon god Dongbo to take over the heavenly Tao. They had to report this to the higher-ups as soon as possible. After the 6 guards left, the surrounding crowd began to discuss. Some were happy, while others were sad. However, in the end, they dissipated like smoke. The god of the East wanted to change the Mirage Heavenly Tao Great World's controller. Now, the Sword Tao Great World had interfered. The moment mortals were involved in a contest between the Heavenly Wheel experts, their souls would be directly wiped out by the Heavenly Tao. Chapter 1964. Entering the Illusion Lord Palace. The huge palace was cold and cheerless. It was no longer the grand scene of thousands of disciples cultivating in the past. Occasionally, one could only see a few desolate shadows wandering around the palace, cleaning up the place. Their cultivation bases were also very low. Qin Hao didn't know what had happened in the Illusion Sovereign Palace, but all the signs indicated that the Illusion Sovereign had encountered trouble. The Supreme God is in the Illusion Sovereign Palace. Everyone, follow me. A figure walked over. Qin Hao followed the voice and saw a young man in clean clothes with an extraordinary temperament. He was probably the disciple of the Illusion Sovereign and had come to greet them. Qin Hao smiled and nodded. The group followed the young man into the depths of the palace and came to a majestic palace filled with divine light. The young man slowly opened the door and said, "Everyone, please enter." "Thank you," Qin Hao said gently. The group stepped into the palace. The young man looked at their backs, and a faint smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. He didn't follow them, but slowly closed the door. "Junior Li Chuji, I was taken care of by Senior Illusion Sovereign in the past. Today, I passed by the temple and came to visit Senior." Qin Hao stepped into the palace. The previously noisy Illusion Sovereign Palace was now cold and cheerless. The space was filled with an invisible chill. It seemed even more desolate than the outside. "Li Chuji," an old voice murmured. In front, a tall figure sat on a cushion and slowly turned around. It was an old man wearing an ancient divine robe. Although he looked very old, the old man's clothes still gave people a feeling of heavenly might. "This old man doesn't seem to know you." The Illusion Sovereign's eyes fell on Qin Hao. He tried hard to recall something, but he couldn't find any impression of Qin Hao. Not only this young man, even the people behind him felt very unfamiliar. He was sure that he had never met them before. "Senior, you really don't know me?" Qin Hao smiled and raised his head. A strand of mind power drifted out and converged with the Illusion Sovereign's mind. At this time, the Illusion Sovereign's expression suddenly changed. The Qin Hao in his line of sight seemed to have changed. Another face seemed to have emerged from the unfamiliar silhouette, and the two faces gradually overlapped. It was as if fragments of the past were being pulled out from the river of memories of the Illusion Sovereign. You are." The Illusion Sovereign pointed forward, his voice trembling. Now that he recognized Qin Hao, great waves surged in his heart. "That's right, it's me. Back then, Senior exhausted his divine power to stabilize my soul. I'll never forget this favor." Qin Hao took a few steps forward, his heart surging with excitement. Wang Huanzun raised his hand and released a layer of divine light. Dense law particles covered the walls of the hall, completely isolating it from the outside world. Then, he nervously stood up from the cushion and rushed in front of Qin Hao. His calloused hands grabbed Qin Hao's hands and said, "You are Qin Hao. You're actually still alive." "It's a long story. It's not just me. Awu is still alive, but he's unable to come and greet Senior." Qin Hao said, "That origin realm is still there." Qin Hao said, "Who?" The Illusion Sovereign let out a heavy breath, and the hall became quiet for the time being. As the controller of the Mirage Plane's heavenly Tao, the Illusion Sovereign naturally knew about the God of the East invasion of the Yuan Ling continent 10,000 years ago. Many planes had participated in that battle. Although the God Masters of each plane did not personally come, they had sent their powerful Heavenly Will Plane experts to form a vast and mighty alliance to seize the Yuan Ling plane and occupy it. That was the origin realm. Because it involved too many things, the God of the East did not dare to make a move, so as to avoid attracting the attention of the God Kings of the upper world. The God of the East believed that the alliance of the three planes was enough to wipe out the Yuan Ling gods and seize the power of the origin realm. But who would have thought that the million-strong alliance army would never return? Even the heavenly Tao aura of the Yuan Ling plane would disappear along with it. Even the God of the East could not sense its whereabouts. At that moment, Dong Wang believed that the Yuan Ling heavenly Tao god had destroyed the origin realm. This had happened once before in the wilderness. At that time, the origin realm had also disappeared, which was truly heartbreaking and regrettable. Of course, Dongwang was even more heartbroken because of the heavenly will plane experts under him. One of them was even his son, whom he had placed high hopes on. His son had disappeared along with the Yuan Ling heavenly Tao. The consequences of the battle of the Yuan Ling gods were far from simple. Not only did it cause the strength of Dongwang's realm to decline, even the other two realm masters who formed the alliance army were greatly dissatisfied with Dongwang. If not for the fear of the news spreading and the god kings of the upper world finding out, the two realm masters would have shed all pretenses of cordiality with Dongwang, triggering a realm war. In the end, the three realm masters were afraid of angering the god kings, so they left the matter unsettled. The battle of the Yuan Ling gods was a scar in the heart of the god of the East. It was also a major event in the hearts of the heavenly Tao holders of the Dongwang's realm. Even after 10,000 years, the illusion elder still remembered it. At this moment, he witnessed Qin Hao's return alive with his own eyes. How could his mood not be stormy? If the god of the East were to find out, Qin Hao, you must not expose your identity. You must not tell anyone. The illusion elder was so nervous that he could not breathe. If Qin Hao's identity was exposed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Senior, don't worry. I know what to do. Qin Hao was moved. He moved his body slightly and introduced the people behind him one by one. This is my wife. These two are my friends. They all came from the Yuanling Plain. Now, that place is called the Divine Wilderness Continent. Divine Wilderness Continent. The illusion elder murmured and sadly shook his head. From this name, one could imagine the tragedy of the battle of the gods 10,000 years ago. Qin Hao was telling him that the battle had caused the Yuan Ling to no longer have any gods and completely cut off the divine Tao. Child, why did you come out? Moreover, your soul seems to be... The illusion elder stared at Qin Hao's face and felt that Qin Hao's soul was very powerful. When he tried to pry, he faintly felt a sense of danger. That power did not seem to be any weaker than his Tianlun power. Could it be? I have already created a Tianlun and controlled the heavenly Tao of the divine wilderness. I have become the god of the divine wilderness plain. Qin Hao gave the illusion elder an answer with his eyes. Who? The illusion elder took 2 deep breaths in his heart. Truly, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. Who would have dared to imagine that the army of the 3 realms, dozens of Tianlun experts, not only did they not succeed in conquering the origin realm, but they also led to the death of a person with an incomplete soul to create a Tianlun and become the ruler of the heavenly Tao. Moreover, that was the ruler of the origin realm. Then your Tianlun is at the perfect level. Qin Hao did not hide this. Good. The illusion elder laughed with a kind face. The god of the East had painstakingly seized the power of the origin realm, but in the end, it was all for Qin Hao. Could this be considered retribution? If that is the case, why did you come out and come to the Dongwang realm? The illusion elder asked. Back then, you helped me stabilize my soul. I believe that Senior must have seen through something. Ah Wu and I have drifted out of the great world, so we naturally have to return. Now, I have left the divine wilderness to explore and familiarize myself with the environment of the myriad worlds. I passed by the illusion elder and also, Qin Hao rubbed his nose. I want to comprehend the space divine power of the Dongwang realm. Since he had come, he would definitely comprehend the heavenly Tao of the Eastern Sky realm. If Qin Hao could condense the space divine power, it would naturally be for the best. If Dongwang knew that he had obtained the divine power of his old enemy, his expression would definitely be very interesting. You are really bold. Unfortunately, I can't help you. Now, the Dongwang Pavilion is controlled by Supreme God Dongbo's people, and the illusion elder spoke until here and promptly omitted the rest of his words. He did not want Qin Hao to worry about the matters here. That would bring trouble to Qin Hao. Chapter 1965. The Mirage Plane was under the control of the god of the East. If Qin Hao wanted to comprehend the power of the world, he had to go to Dongwang's pavilion. In fact, When experts from other planes came here, they would first enter Dongwang's pavilion to comprehend the space world Tao will. Only in this way could they reduce the suppression of the world's will. In the past, the illusion sovereign controlled the mirage, heavenly Tao, and was the representative of the god of the East. Therefore, it was easy for Qin Hao to enter Dongwang's pavilion. Now, it was different from the past. His position as the heavenly Tao's representative could not be maintained for long. Supreme God Dongbo was the direct disciple of the god of the East. He had attained the divine Tao and forged the heavenly wheel 100 years ago. Now, he was living in Dongwang's pavilion and had restricted the movements of the illusion sovereign. Once the God Lord gave the order, he would replace the illusion sovereign's position at any time. The person who was guarding the gate was Supreme God Dongbo's divine guard. In that case, let's go to Dongwang's pavilion first. We will come back later to chat with Senior. Qin Hao could see that the illusion sovereign was in a difficult position. He had a faint guess in his heart, but he did not say it out loud. He cupped his hands and left with Xiao Han and the others. They went all the way to Dongwang's pavilion. I'm afraid that Senior Illusion Sovereign's position will not be maintained. After leaving the hall, Xiao Han approached Qin Hao and whispered. She had also seen the abnormality. It's just a small mirage, heavenly Tao. Why not abandon it? Qin Hao did not care about this. The mirage plane was not worthy of his senior's protection. The illusion sovereign should have a broader stage of the divine Tao. Wuck's eyes flashed with a strange light. He secretly glanced at Qin Hao. Did he have some thoughts about the old man? Along the way to Dongwang's pavilion, Qin Hao had a thought when he left the divine wilderness. It was not enough for the 4 regions to produce many gods. If he wanted to quickly increase the strength of the divine wilderness, he needed to bring in heavenly will experts from other planes. The illusion sovereign was the first person he thought of. However, nothing could be forced. If he directly asked the illusion elder to leave with him, it would be too rash. Moreover, the illusion elder might not be willing. Now, Dongwang was preparing to let his direct disciples replace the illusion lord and control the heavenly Tao. This gave Qin Hao an opportunity. Since Dongwang had given him a heavenly wheel expert for free, how could he not accept it? Moreover, with the illusion elder's current situation, he most likely had no choice but to leave. It's the best of both worlds. Qin Hao's mouth glowed with delight. In front of him, a gigantic building that reached the sky came into view. Dongwang Pavilion. The Dongwang Pavilion was located at a very high location and was surrounded by the radiance of the divine path. Other than the illusion deity palace, this was the holy land of cultivation that all the cultivators in the continent dreamed of. The Dongwang Pavilion was built by people sent by the god of the East. Inside, there were countless emperor's techniques, all of which were copied from the Dongwang Palace of the main world. They were powerful and precious, far more powerful than the techniques of ordinary Emperor's Path forces outside. After stepping into the Emperor's Path, if a cultivator wanted to further increase their strength, the Dongwang Pavilion and the Illusion Deity Palace were necessary choices. In comparison, the Dongwang Pavilion contained Emperor's techniques, which was somewhat similar to the Divine Pavilion built by Qin Hao. The Illusion Deity Palace had the Illusion Deity personally teaching it, so the latter's conditions were naturally superior. In the past, the Illusion Deity Palace was bustling with people, and there was an endless stream of people seeking Tao. Now, the situation was the opposite. The Illusion Deity Palace had declined, and the Dongwang Pavilion was becoming more and more popular. According to rumors, Supreme God Dongbo would soon descend to the Dongwang Pavilion from the main world to control the illusion heavenly Tao. Under such circumstances, it was obviously wiser to enter the Dongwang Pavilion to cultivate. After all, Supreme God Dongbo was about to replace the illusion deity. A majestic sky staircase led to the magnificent Dongwang Pavilion, and there were many guards armed with swords standing on both sides. Seeing that Qin Hao and his group were about to walk up, they immediately stopped them. I'm here to comprehend the Divine Master's divine decree in the Dongwang Pavilion. Qin Hao furrowed his brows. Report your name, origin, and cultivation. A guard asked sternly. Li Chuji, itinerant cultivator, Nirvana realm, level 3 laws. Qin Hao concealed his true cultivation level. The guard nodded. Apart from obtaining Supreme God Dongbo's approval, there was another way to enter the Dongwang Pavilion, and that was to take a test. Presumably, this group of people was here for the test. As long as they passed, they could enter the Dongwang Pavilion to obtain Emperor techniques to cultivate. However, the test was very difficult, and ordinary people basically had no hope. Only the monstrous geniuses of the continent's Emperor Dao aristocratic families had a chance. Moreover, the test was divided into different levels. The higher the difficulty, the more resources one could obtain, and the easier it was to be valued by the Dongwang Pavilion. Oh, I was wondering who it was. So it's the illusion deity. Since the illusion deity is here to explain the divine Dao to you, why do you still want to come to the Dongwang Pavilion for the test? Could it be that you think the illusion deity's ability is not up to par and you don't like it? Just as the guard was about to let them pass, a mocking voice came from above the sky staircase. Qin Hao looked up and saw that it was divine General Dongbo who had stopped them from entering the illusion deity palace. The illusion deity's divine Dao is naturally profound, but the Dongwang Pavilion has the God of the East's divine will. Everyone has their own strengths. We admire the Divine Lord's might and comprehend the Divine Lord's divine will. Is it not appropriate? Qin Hao replied. Of course it's appropriate. However, our Dongwang Pavilion is not a place where just anyone can step in. There are many cultivators here every day, and we don't have the time to entertain you. Moreover, most of the people who come to take the test are unable to pass, wasting their time. In response to this, Supreme God Dongbo has set up a selection rule, and we divine generals will decide. I don't think you're qualified, the tall and burly unblemished divine general said. Not qualified? These words made Qin Hao's face darken. In front of the illusion deity palace, Wuk had fought 6 unblemished divine generals with one sword, and they could not even withstand a single blow. Was this not qualified? If he and Wuk were not qualified, then what was divine General Dongbo, who was standing on the sky staircase? Obviously, the other party was deliberately making things difficult. At this moment, that divine General Dongbo looked at Qin Hao with a smile, looking down at him condescendingly. If one wanted to enter the Dongwang Pavilion, they would have to give their approval first. Qin Hao did not say anything. He had nothing to say to his servant. At this moment, his divine will swept out and went up the sky staircase, passing by the 6 divine generals' Dongwang Pavilion, and in an instant spied on the situation above in detail. At this moment, in the square of the Dongwang Pavilion, a group of men and women were drinking tea and discussing Tao. All of them had an extraordinary temperament. Among them, a young man was sitting there. Qin Hao had seen him not long ago. It was the young man who led them into the illusion deity palace. This young man sensed the arrival of a telekinetic power, as if he had expected Qin Hao's group to come here. He immediately looked in the direction of the sky staircase with a smile, as if he was looking at Qin Hao from a distance. Who is it? How dare you? Several voices shouted from the banquet. There was actually someone who dared to use telekinetic power to spy on the Dongwang Pavilion, daring to rudely spy on them. In an instant, these people's eyes became incomparably sharp. Among them, a woman in a luxurious palace dress directly burst out her telekinetic power, pressing down on the sky staircase from above. The others also surged with Emperor's light, and waves of telekinetic power gathered on Qin Hao's body. However, they were directly ignored by Qin Hao. Who's in charge here? Qin Hao shouted up in the air. At this time, the people in the square stood up one after another. The young man also slowly stood up and smiled at the crowd, saying, "Let's go and take a look." Everyone nodded and followed behind the young man. Soon, they arrived at the sky staircase, and their eyes focused on Qin Hao's position. This is the son of the Dongbo Supreme God, the divine son of Higashua. The tall and burly divine general pointed at the young man and said respectfully. Qin Hao's heart trembled. The son of the Dongbo Supreme God, This person was not a disciple of Senior Illusion Reverend. It seemed that the matter was more serious than he had imagined, and Senior Illusion Reverend was obviously grounded. Moreover, the son of the Dongbo Supreme God was personally monitoring him. Where did this barbarian come from? How rude. Beside the divine son of Higashiwa, a woman in a luxurious palace dress scolded Qin Hao and the others. Her eyes were extremely unfriendly. She was drinking tea and discussing with the divine son of Higashiwa, and they were talking about life's ideals. Suddenly, her mood was disturbed, and she naturally saw Qin Hao as an eyesore. Everyone, we meet again. I guess that you would come here, but I didn't expect it to be so soon. The divine son of Higashiwa said. I chatted with Senior Illusion Reverend for a while. Because I'm not used to the power of the great space world, I came to the Dongwang Pavilion to comprehend the divine will of the Divine Master. Qin Hao said. Higashiwa nodded. This was normal. Any cultivator from any plane that came to the Dongwang realm would reject the power of space. Only by comprehending the divine will of the God of the East and integrating it with the heavenly way would they be able to alleviate the pressure of the heavenly way. Your servants are not allowed to enter. Tang pointed at the tall and burly divine general. These are my father's guards. They are here to carry out orders. What they do is what they should do. It's their duty. Higashiwa said. The tall and burly divine general immediately raised his nose in pride. I don't know how to qualify for the examination of the Dongwang Pavilion. If this person can deny us with just one sentence, then can I assume that one day, when the divine son of Higashiwa comes to our sword world, I can also stop you from comprehending the sword master's will and let you be suppressed by the sword power of the sword world? Qin Hao said righteously. How dare you? The tall and burly divine general said angrily. Why wouldn't I dare? We came from afar to comprehend the divine will of the God of the East and relieve the pressure of the space world. If you don't allow it, then as long as you dare to enter the sword world, I won't allow you to take half a step into the Sword God Pavilion. Showuk shouted loudly with an aggressive aura. It was as if he was using his power to suppress them. The group of people behind the divine son of Higashiwa had ugly expressions. If this was true, then the people of the space world would inevitably suffer. Ha ha! You are indeed people of the Great Path Sword World. You are so straightforward. Consider my loss. Higashiwa laughed loudly. We have no intention of offending the Dongwang realm. We just want to enter the Dongwang Pavilion. Is that okay? Qin Hao said. Since the other party believed that they were from the sword world, they might as well use the identity of sword cultivators from the sword world. Okay, Higashiwa nodded. However, let me give you a piece of advice. The sword world shouldn't interfere with the illusion Reverend's matter. He wasn't sure what status Qin Hao and Showuk had in the sword world. From their performance, to be able to reach Nirvana realm, they were at least from the Sword Monarch clan. If their clan was related to the master of the sword world, it would be troublesome. Therefore, Higashiwa didn't dare to be too forceful and tactfully advised. Divine Son's words are laughable. I once met Senior Illusion Reverend by chance. The matters of the Dongwang realm should be arranged by the God of the East. Why should I interfere? Qin Hao said casually. Are you going to let us in or not? Kuang Tang couldn't wait any longer. Due to his innate spiritual consciousness being damaged, he suffered a greater spatial suppression than Xiaohan and Showuk. It was very uncomfortable to be under the illusion heavenly Tao. Naturally, you can enter. However, you mocked my father's divine generals as trash in front of the illusion Reverend's palace. Shouldn't you apologize to them? Higashiwa's tone changed, and his eyes turned cold. If you can't, leave that woman behind. The rest of you can crawl out of the Dongwang plain. Heavy footsteps came out from the Dongwang pavilion. Dong dong. The ground shook. Following that, a tall and sturdy figure wearing heavy armor stood beside Higashiwa. A boxy and rough face stared below. The light of the 9 realms of the martial path revolved around his tyrannical body, with mottled law particles surging. When this person appeared, the 6 divine generals who were defeated earlier had a change in expression. They lowered their heads and did not have the courage to look at this tall and sturdy general. It was as if they had an inferiority complex. Yukong, Nirvana Realm, Level 3 Laws. Higashua introduced. Yukong was the divine general by his father's side. His father had several experts like him under his command. As the god of the East had yet to give the order, his father and many of his men could not all be sent to the Mirage Plain. Only Yukong was sent to guard the Dongwon Pavilion. He was also the strongest Dao protector by Higashua's side. As for the 6 unblemished divine generals, they were at most divine guards. At this moment, Yukong's face was especially cold. Qin Hao's words of trash not only insulted others, but also trampled on his dignity. At this moment, the 9 realms of the martial path that revolved around his body suddenly erupted. A Nirvana Emperor's aura surged from the stairway to heaven. He stretched his palm downwards and blasted towards Qin Hao's position. The 9 realms of the martial path swirled like a gale, setting off layers of terrifying Dao radiance. The spatial energy contained in Mirage City also crazily crushed towards Qin Hao. Showuk took a step forward. The 9 realms of the martial path revolved around his body. He directly ignored the palm that descended from the sky. He stepped onto the first step of the stairway to heaven and began to ascend. A loud rumbling sound rolled and roared. Cracks appeared on every step of the stairway to heaven. The stone steps used to construct the Dongwon Pavilion were naturally extraordinary. They were incomparably sturdy and reinforced by spatial energy. But at this moment, countless cracks appeared under the pressure of the palm. It was clear how powerful Yukong was. Something big has happened. The battle has begun. Many cultivators in the city were alarmed. They looked at the Dongwon Pavilion. Figures flew over from different positions and hovered in the air to watch the battle. Someone actually dared to barge into the Dongwon Pavilion. They were extremely bold. At this moment, in the Illusion Lord's palace, the Illusion Lord also felt the will of the Great Path erupting from the Dongwon Pavilion. Borrowing the power of the Heavenly Path, the scene was clearly transmitted to his divine consciousness. His expression was calm, and he did not step forward to stop it. If he were to intervene, it would be easier to implicate Qin Hao, and the relationship between the 2 sides would be unclear. Swoosh! A ray of sword light suddenly shot out from Wuk's body. The golden sword light was wrapped in the light of the 9 realms. It was suffused with the light of particles. It went against the sky and pierced through the void. Suddenly, the power that suppressed this part of the world disappeared. The raging wind suddenly stopped. Apologize? Was this strength worthy of an apology? Yukong's plane was similar to Wuk's, and his precepts were also 1 level higher. Even so, he could not stop his advance. He walked up step by step. Today, he wanted to see who could stop him from entering the Dongwon Pavilion. Not bad, Yukong praised. That wisp of sword was extremely sharp and pure, as expected of a cultivator from the great world of swordsmanship. Bang! Yukong's foot stomped down. The sky's staircase shook as if it was about to shatter. Countless cultivators who were watching the battle from afar felt their hearts tighten. He clenched his hand into a fist, and the endless power of space condensed into a fist light. He punched out, and a loud sound erupted from the space. It was extremely terrifying. It was as if wherever the will of the Great Path passed, everything would explode under his fist. Wuk looked up and felt the power contained in this fist. Finally, there was something to it. He did not stop and continued to move forward against the might of Yukong's fist. When a series of sonic booms were about to explode in front of him, he pointed his finger forward. It was as dazzling as the sword light. With a whoosh, it seemed to have penetrated something. Suddenly, the intense light of particles was annihilated under his sword finger. He continued to move forward. So powerful. Who were they? Countless cultivators outside the arena were shocked. This sword had stunned the cultivators of Mirage City. It was a feast for their eyes. Even the group of aristocratic family members behind Higashua nodded. Such a powerful and pure sword will. Not to mention Mirage City, there were probably not many sword cultivators in the entire Dongwon Great World that could compare to this person. This scene made Higashiwa's eyes light up. It felt as if he had found a treasure. "Do you need us to apologize with this little strength?" Qin Hao laughed as he shouted upwards. He discovered that the flawless sword intent was even purer than before. As his cultivation level increased, it was as though no energy from the myriad of things in the world could be mixed into his flawless sword intent. His sword wasn't affected by the myriad of laws. The laws and regulations he had condensed were the same as each other, bringing with it an incomparably powerful piercing force. At this moment, Qin Hao was a little bit looking forward to Wuk becoming a god. Chapter 1967. Yukong was defeated by Showuk. Higashiwa's evaluation was that there were countless experts in the Dongwon realm, and there were many who defeated Yukong. He admitted defeat, but he didn't lower the standards of the Dongwon realm. This made Wuk seem mediocre instead. After all, there were many people like Wuk in the realm. "I'm ashamed to say that our strength is at the bottom of the sword realm. Furthermore, my brother didn't use his full strength and made a fool of himself in front of God Higashiwa." Qin Hao took a step forward and pretended to be humble. Everyone couldn't help but want to beat him up. When they heard his words, their faces turned even uglier. Showuk defeated Yukong, and his strength was at the bottom? How many Yukongs were there in the Dongwon realm? Putting aside the few Heavenly Wheel experts, Yukong's combat strength was definitely at the top. Higashiwa didn't blush when he boasted, but he didn't expect Qin Hao to be even more arrogant. As they walked up, when Qin Hao passed by Yukong, this divine general under Supreme God Dongbai was so angry that his body trembled. He had the urge to tear Qin Hao in half. At this moment, Qin Hao and the rest stepped into the training hall. In front of them, a huge and majestic shrine stood tall. In front of the door, there was a statue. It was the statue of the god of the East. This statue looked to be around 40 to 50 years old. Its outline was clear, and its eyes were bright and full of spirit. It stood at a height of a few hundred feet, like a guardian god. It emitted a huge pressure that made people sigh in awe. Qin Hao looked at the statue, and their eyes met. It felt like he was looking at the god of the East from a distance. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that the statue was alive, and the stronger the pressure it emitted was. However, Qin Hao's state of mind was very calm, without any ripples. To enter the Dongwon Pavilion, you have to undergo a test. As for what level you can achieve, it depends on you. Higashiwa brought many disciples from the aristocratic families to watch from the side. He pointed at the statue and said, "Then what is considered as meeting the standard?" Qin Hao glanced at Higashiwa. Communicating with the statue of the Divine Master and resonating with the Divine Will is the lowest requirement. If you have the ability to summon the Divine Master's will, congratulations, you might even be able to take control of the Dongwon Pavilion. The tall immortal general snorted coldly. Unfortunately, in the entire Dongwon's realm, no one has been able to summon the will of a Divine Master. Higashiwa said. He was not lying. Not to mention a Nirvana realm expert. Even a Heavenly Wheel realm expert would find it extremely difficult to alarm the God of the East by relying on the resonance of Divine Will. Basically, it was impossible for anyone to do it. Qin Hao nodded. The body of several tens of feet was dazzling with divine light. A divine radiance of the great Tao soared into the sky and soared into the firmament. In an instant, the heavenly path of Mirage rumbled. A formless aura descended and poured into Qin Hao's body as though it had fused with his divine soul. Countless people were dumbfounded. Resonating with the heavenly path of a plane and controlling the might of the heavenly path was not something that could be easily done by the geniuses of the aristocratic families in the Dongwon's realm. Qin Hao's performance was sufficient to prove that he had the potential to become a Heavenly Wheel expert. In the future, he might very well become the ruler of a plane. If such a person was born in any other imperial family, he would definitely be worshipped like an ancestor. He would get whatever he wanted. To put it bluntly, even as the son of the Dongbo Divine Lord, Higashua might not be able to resonate with the heavenly path of Mirage. If the father attained the divine throne, the son might not become a god. At most, he would be able to borrow the power of the heavenly path. However, Li Chuji, a mere member of the Sword World, had achieved what countless cultivators in the spatial world dreamed of. He had a chance to forge a heavenly wheel. Buzz. At this moment, a multicolored radiance radiated out. It was so dazzling that people could not open their eyes. In Mirage City, countless people cried out in alarm. They felt the heavenly will descend upon the city and suppress this part of the world. Everyone standing in the Donghuang's pavilion felt as though their blood had frozen and their hearts had stopped beating. How could this be? Things were progressing too quickly. If Qin Hao was merely summoning the heavenly will and trying to control it, then at this moment, he had turned the power of control into reality. His will was leading the heavenly path to suppress Mirage City. Even the illusion sovereign in the illusion sovereign palace was dumbfounded. Could this be the terrifying part of the heavenly wheel of the original realm? The illusion sovereign sensed the commotion in the Donghuang's pavilion. The original realm gathered everything into one and gathered all the laws of the universe to achieve perfection. Outside of the original realm, other heavenly paths were born with imperfections. The will released by Qin Hao could make up for the imperfections of the Mirage. Therefore, his will was recognized by the plane's will and was willing to let him control it. This was the strength of the original realm. No matter which plane it was in, not only would it not be restricted or suppressed, it could even merge with the plane and replace the imperfections. The illusion sovereign did not doubt that as long as Qin Hao was willing, he could absorb the heavenly path of Mirage into his will and make the plane reject the illusion sovereign. It was simply heaven-defying. In just an instant, they pierced into everyone's eyes. They could not even feel the speed of the sword auras and the distance between the two sides. Before they could react, the sword will had already pierced into their spiritual souls. Boom! The qi that surrounded Qin Hao dissipated. The Tian Luan and the flame divine power in his body were hidden in his flesh and blood. The will that shrouded the secret room dissipated. Everything returned to normal. Xiao Han, Wuk, and Tang looked up in a daze. They could faintly see a terrifying flame matrix slowly dissipating from the red ceiling of the secret room. The three of them sat still and trembled. What swordsmanship is this? Wuk said in shock. He was born for the sword. Even someone as strong as Swordmaster Jinji was killed before he could react. It was terrifying. I don't know either. Qin Hao chuckled. Let's call it the spatial swordsmanship for now. As for the name, he really hadn't thought of it yet. However, this sword could cross the void and directly stab at the position of the opponent. Wherever the opponent was, Qin Hao's sword would be there. As long as his Tianluan divine power was strong enough, he could even sit here and urge the sword will to descend into the bedchamber of the god of the East. I don't even have a chance to reverse it. Xiao Han smiled bitterly and shook his head. Because your cultivation is not high enough. It will be different when you cast the Tianluan. Qin Hao explained with a smile. Teach me. Wuk stood up abruptly. It was too strong. This spatial swordsmanship was unreasonable. He had to learn it. Okay. Qin Hao nodded. In fact, if he condensed the divine power of space in the Tianluan, the power of the sword qi of the void would be even greater. It was not something that could be achieved overnight. Tang scratched his ears and cheeks at the side with a sullen and bitter expression. After entering the Donghuang pavilion, he seemed to have gained nothing. There was no sense of achievement. Let's go. Qin Hao stood up and said to everyone. They should have cultivated for a long time. It was time to go back and say goodbye to Senior Illusion Lord. Dongwon Pavilion had too many spatial books. In just a few days, it was impossible to read all of them. Qin Hao learned a few powerful spatial techniques from them and cultivated a void sword technique that was suitable for him. It could be said that he had gained something. It was a pity that he had let go of a treasure pavilion. If he could move it into the divine wilderness, the warriors of the four regions who cultivated spatial abilities would definitely have an epic level of improvement. Qin Hao really wanted to put into the Great Void Cauldron before he left and bring it back. Back to the Illusion Lord Palace. During this period of time, many big things had happened in the city. Higashiwa was taken away by Dongbo's supreme god subordinates and left the Mirage Plain.